Hey guys, tonight we slip into a Paris that smells faintly of roasted chestnuts, cigarette paper, and a kind of restless ambition that keeps the whole city awake long after it should be in bed. You're waking up as a young Bohemian woman in Montparnasse before the world glamorized that word, before postcards froze the era into a sepia-colored fantasy. Right now, it's just you, a thin window, and a stripe of early morning light that insists on crawling across your face like it pays rent. You probably won't survive this, at least not without developing a lifelong relationship with cheap caffeine, questionable friendships, and the sort of optimism that gets people into trouble and into history books. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, let me know your location and the local time you're watching. Paris never sleeps the same way twice, and neither do we. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're still half buried in a rumpled blanket, if you can call one thin layer of wool a blanket, listening to wooden carts roll across cobblestones below. It's too early for the bars, too late for the after-parties, and somehow the city still finds a way to be noisy. Paris has always excelled at multitasking. A neighbor's radio coughs out a scratchy jazz melody. Someone slams a door. Someone else curses about the cold. You stretch, accidentally bump your elbow on the slanted attic ceiling, and remember again that your room used to be an artist's storage space. Historians still argue whether these tiny Montparnasse garrets represented freedom or just really creative poverty. The truth? It's both. And you feel that duality every morning when you decide whether to spend your last few coins on bread or charcoal pencils. You pull on yesterday's, dress wrinkled but passably artsy, and step onto the uneven wooden floor. Your boots live by the door because there's no other place for them to live. A small mirror hangs crooked on a nail. You look like you belong to this city. Hair undone, eyes sharp, a little hollow from late nights and long ambitions. There's a kind of tired beauty in being young and determined in 1,920 seconds. Paris, though no one ever warns you that determination is not a stable source of calories. A faint draft sweeps under the gap of your door, carrying with it the smell of fresh bread from a bakery 2 floors down. Bohemian doesn't mean you don't enjoy comforts, it just means you rarely get them. You slip into your coat a hand-me-down from a friend of a friend who owed someone else a favor. Clothing is its own underground economy here. Everything carries a story, sometimes also lice, though you do your best not to think about that before breakfast. As you descend the narrow stairs, each wooden step creaks with the exaggerated flair of a performer who wants attention. The entire building feels alive, full of writers who haven't written, painters who haven't painted, and dreamers who absolutely refuse to get real jobs. Your landlord, a man with the emotional range of a stone gargoyle, sits behind a small desk reading a newspaper. He glances at you with that expression all landlords eventually develop, the one that asks, "Will she pay rent this week?" You offer him the world's most neutral smile, the kind that suggests you've absolutely got it covered. You don't. But he doesn't ask, and you continue out the door, stepping into breath-frosting morning air. Montparnasse at this hour feels like the city blinking awake. The street cleaners sweep last night's cigarette butts into neat piles. Market vendors set up wooden crates of produce with the seriousness of surgeons. A few cafés are already open, their front windows fogged from the heat inside. You linger at one, watching patrons hunch over their cups like monks protecting sacred relics. Cheap coffee here is more of a suggestion than a beverage. Dark, watery, slightly burnt, but it keeps the bloodstream moving. As you walk, you catch glimpses of posters layered on walls. Art exhibitions, anarchist meetings, jazz nights, poetry readings where someone will inevitably cry. One poster advertises a lecture claiming heroin could expand creative consciousness, a trend creeping around Bohemian circles lately. Historians still argue whether these claims were naively experimental or dangerously irresponsible. Either way, you treat the idea the same way you treat a suspiciously cheap pastry. Interesting, but absolutely not worth waking up in a ditch over. A dog trots past, carrying a baguette in its mouth like a treasure. Its owner chases behind, shouting insults in a tone that suggests this is not the first time. You smile. Life here is ridiculous in small, charming ways. One of your neighbors once tried to start a rooftop garden using only rainwater and pure artistic intention. The plants lasted 3 days, a record by Bohemian standards. As you move deeper into the street, a burst of warmth hits your face from a cafe doorway. Inside, A few early risers sit hunched over notebooks and sketch pads. You pause, watching them through the window. This is where the day begins, for people like you, not with grand inspiration, but with small, stubborn rituals. A cheap cup of café crème, a scrap of paper, a half-formed idea scribbled before it slips away. You push through the cafe door. A bell rings, and the waitress, who looks like she hasn't slept since last winter, nods at you. You order the cheapest option on the menu, and she brings you something that tastes faintly like burnt hope. But it's warm, and right now, that's enough. As you sip, the city's rhythm wraps around you, the clink of spoons, the hiss of steam, the rustle of newspapers. You overhear two men arguing passionately about a sculpture one of them hasn't even seen yet. That's Paris opinions first, facts later. One of them claims the piece redefines reality. The other insists it violates the very concept of form. Historians still argue whether the 1,920 seconds art scene was groundbreaking or just theatrical chaos with better lighting. You finish your drink, place a few coins on the table, more than you can comfortably spare, and step back outside. Paris has fully awakened now, buzzing, alive, indifferent to your existence, but somehow also shaped by it. You take a long breath of cold air, the kind that clears the fog in your head, and begin walking toward whatever the day demands of you. You step back into the swirl of morning traffic, letting the city pull you along like a loose thread on a too-worn coat. The cafés of Montparnasse are already filling because Paris never met a chair and a caffeine source. It didn't immediately turn into a philosophical battlefield. You head toward your usual spot, a narrow little establishment whose name sounds poetic until you realize it just means the coffee corner, which feels about right for a place that sells coffee that tastes like it's been reheated since last Tuesday. You slip inside, pushing past the heavy door that always sticks halfway, as if the building itself is tired of letting Bohemians in. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, clinking cups, and the faint smell of something frying that you hope is food. You weave between wooden tables carved with layers of initials from lovers and artists who never quite made it out of the cafe stage. A musician in the corner plucks at a broken guitar string with the same intensity as someone defusing a bomb. Historians still argue whether these cafes were incubators of genius or simply refuges for people avoiding their real responsibilities. Honestly, they're probably both, which is why you fit perfectly here. You find your seat, a small round table right by the window where the sun hits the glass just enough to warm your fingers, but not enough to reveal the full tragedy of your chipped cup. It's a delicate balance. The waitress nods at you and sets down the usual coffee that could strip paint from metal, and a tiny sugar cube meant to trick your taste buds into forgiveness. You dissolve the cube, stir slowly, and breathe in the bitter steam. To your surprise, it smells slightly less burnt today, like the universe is offering one very small, very conditional blessing. Around you, conversations crackle like static. Two poets loudly debate whether rhyme is bourgeois. A painter insists his latest piece will change the future of color, which is impressive considering he mostly paints in shades of sad brown. A woman in a cloche hat reads a banned book with the confidence of someone daring the universe to challenge her. You admire that. Paris is full of tiny rebellions, long skirts, shortened by safety pins, cigarettes smoked without shame, opinions stated with reckless authority. You're surrounded by people who don't fit anywhere else, so they all squeeze in here and pretend it's intentional. You take out your notebook, placing it on the table like you're about to do something profound. Instead, you doodle a quick sketch of the waitress, her messy hair tied back with what appears to be a bootlace. Your art isn't perfect, but it's honest, and honesty counts for something in a city that sometimes mistakes style for substance. One mainstream fact drifts through your mind. Paris in the 1,920 seconds had more cafes per square mile than almost any major city in Europe, because where else could people gather to loudly judge each other's ideas over a drink that costs more than rent? Your pencil moves idly, and you overhear a conversation at the next table, a heated whisper about someone's cousin who tried that new powder last night and didn't wake up until noon. It's spoken half like gossip, half like concern, wrapped in the casual tone Parisians use when pretending not to panic. Heroin is drifting into cafes now, slinking around the edges of Bohemian life. Some claim it unlocks creative doors, others insist it slams them shut forever. Historians still argue whether its rise in Paris was fueled by artistic curiosity, social desperation, or clever marketing by people who definitely did not care about your spiritual enlightenment. A friend drops into the seat across from you without asking, which is the standard greeting among Bohemians. She wears a coat that once belonged to someone who once belonged to someone else, and her hair is tied back with a scarf that could double as a curtain. She glances at your sketch and smirks. "That looks nothing like her," she says. You shrug. Neither does she. She laughs, a dry, smoky sound that lifts the mood the way cheap wine lifts spirits. She tells you about a recent art exhibition where a critic fainted, though it's unclear whether it was from shock, hunger, or the fumes from experimental glue. You share a joke about last night's musician who played a trumpet solo so long you're pretty sure he briefly left his body. It's a harmless joke, the kind people make to survive the weight of trying to create something meaningful. Your friend orders coffee, but only drinks half before declaring it philosophically disappointing. You counter that disappointment is the house specialty. She agrees. Outside the window, you watch Paris unfold with its usual flair. A painter hauling canvases twice his size, a grocer arguing with a customer about apples, a woman balancing a baguette under one arm and a baby under the other. The city is a moving collage, every street a puzzle piece that fits only because no two pieces are alike. A quirky fact you once overheard floats up. Some Montparnasse cafés used to let struggling artists pay their tabs with sketches, on napkins or tabletops. The owners kept them tucked away in drawers like secret treasure. Some of those sketches later became priceless. Others simply turned into oddly sentimental scraps. You wonder which category your scribbles might fall into someday. Maybe mildly interesting. Maybe please throw this out immediately. You sip your coffee again. It still tastes like disappointment. But it's your disappointment. And that somehow makes it comforting. Your friend finally rises, tossing her scarf over her shoulder in a dramatic arc that nearly hits a stranger. "Work calls," she says, meaning she needs to sit in her room and stare at a canvas until inspiration stops laughing. You stay a little longer, letting yourself dissolve into the cafe's familiar chaos. The noise, the smoke, the certainty that everyone here believes they're on the edge of greatness. It all wraps around you like a patchwork quilt stitched together from hope, exhaustion, and caffeine. When your cup is empty, you tuck your notebook away, place the coins you can spare on the table, and rise to leave. The door sticks again. You shove it harder, stepping back into the bright, chilly morning. Paris greets you with its usual confidence, and you, still tired, still hopeful, walk toward the rest of your uncertain, exhilarating day. You wander down the sidewalk with your hands tucked inside your coat, letting the city's cool breath nip at your cheeks. Paris, in the 1920 seconds, has a special way of waking up. Far too stylish for the hour. A little grumpy, but always prepared to turn inconvenience into charm. As you walk, the hem of your dress brushes against your ankles, and you're reminded that clothing here isn't just fabric, it's identity. And in your case, identity comes stitched with frayed seams, uneven hems, and a thrift shop confidence strong enough to withstand a judgmental stare or two. Bohemian fashion isn't glamorous the way later documentaries pretend. It's more creative problem-solving under financial duress. You pass a shop window and catch your reflection, a dress that fits everywhere except the shoulders, a scarf that was once ivory before life in Montparnasse introduced it to 12 shades of dust, and boots that squeak in protest every time you walk uphill. Historians still argue whether Montparnasse bohemians were intentionally stylish, or if they simply leaned into chaos until chaos became aesthetic. You suspect the latter. It's cheaper. You tug your coat tighter. It's a glorious thing, if by glorious you mean stolen from the lost and found box of a bar famous for losing things. It hangs a bit too large, giving you the silhouette of a dramatic poet, or perhaps a suspiciously fashionable scarecrow. But here, that's enough. In Paris, confidence counts as tailoring. A quirky fact you learned from a seamstress friend floats to mind. Some artists purposely wore mismatched patterns because they believed it excited the feels, imagination. Supposedly the clash of colors stimulated genius. You're not sure whether your own mismatched clothing is stimulating genius or simply insulting basic color theory. Either way, it's doing something. You pass a woman with a perfectly shaped bob haircut and a sleek drop-waist dress. Chanel-inspired, no doubt. She looks like a museum piece in motion, all clean lines and effortless precision. You, in contrast, look like someone who lost a fight with a thrift market stall. But there's a quiet pride in that. You've earned every stain, every patch, every stitch you've re-sewn at 2 in the morning with a blunt needle and a prayer. Besides, Bohemian women are expected to break rules. Lengths shorten, fabrics mix. Jewelry is a chaotic combination of gifts, trades, and things you found at the bottom of drawers you don't technically own. You once wore 3 necklaces because you couldn't decide which one made you look more rebellious. The answer was none of them, but you've never let facts interfere with confidence. You turn into an alley lined with tiny tailoring shops. A tailor waves at you, recognizing you from the time you paid for a repaired hem with a poem. He still keeps the poem pinned to his wall. He claims it brings good luck. You suspect it's just because it rhymes, and rhyming makes people feel smart. Farther ahead, 2 girls lean against a brick wall, rolling cigarettes with the ease of magicians. Their skirts have been daringly shortened with crude scissors, uneven, jagged, somehow perfect. One of them is wearing a man's vest over a silk blouse. Gender norms in Montparnasse are more like suggestions, and usually ignored. They nod at you, sharing that unspoken camaraderie all Bohemian women share, the kind that says, "We may not know what we're doing, but we're doing it boldly." A little farther down the street, you pass a pile of discarded clothing outside an apartment building. This is the Montparnasse version of a treasure chest. You sift through it quietly, discreetly, pretending you're just inspecting the world as an artist does. You find a hat with a dented brim and a button missing. Perfect. You tuck it under your arm, feeling a tiny thrill of victory. Realistically, the previous owner threw it out because it smells faintly like cheese, but with enough sun exposure, anything improves. As you continue walking, you imagine how outsiders see the Bohemian look romanticized, curated, effortless. But from inside, it's simply survival with flair. Clothes are swapped, borrowed, altered, reinvented. You once exchanged a pair of gloves for a paintbrush. Another time you gave someone half a loaf of bread in return for a scarf that now doubles as a tablecloth, curtain, and occasional emergency towel. Paris is a barter system wrapped in a fashion statement, and yet, even with the frayed fabric, there's a power to dressing as you do. It's a statement. I choose my own shape in the world. Women's fashion is changing, hemlines rising, silhouettes loosening, corsets disappearing. You feel that shift every time you move, every time you breathe freely without whalebones stabbing your ribs. It's liberation you can wear, even if it comes with the occasional hole you accidentally put your finger through. You tuck your new hat onto your head and continue walking. The brim is slightly lopsided, giving you the appearance of someone who is either charmingly eccentric or deeply confused. Either option is acceptable in Paris. Near the corner, you hear someone calling your name. It's a painter friend, standing outside a small gallery with paint on her hands and sleeves and eyebrows. She looks like she face-planted into her own palette, which, given her process, may actually be true. She grins and gestures at your outfit. You look positively avant-garde today, she says. That means messy, you reply. Yes, she nods, but confidently messy. She asks if you're joining a group later for a portrait session. Apparently someone purchased 3 whole canvases, which means for the next few days he'll be insufferable. You decline with a smile. You have errands to finish before the day steals your energy. She waves goodbye, leaving a smear of blue paint on the doorframe as she enters the gallery. A historian somewhere will one day misinterpret that mark as symbolic. They always do. You turn onto a busy street, your boots squeaking rhythmically. A passerby gives you a long look, not judgmental, just curious. Your layered outfit, patched stockings, and thrifted coat make you stand out among the more tailored Parisians. But here, that attention often comes with admiration, envy, or inspiration. Mainstream fact. Fashion photographers in Paris were increasingly snapping candid photos of bohemians in this era, not because they understood the lifestyle, but because the clothing was visually interesting. Bold, unpredictable, affordable. You smile to yourself. If only they knew the real reason your fashion is bold. It's whatever you could find this morning that was cleanish. Your scarf unravels slightly, trailing behind you like a philosophical ribbon. You wrap it around again, adding a half twist that you pretend is intentional. In Bohemian Paris, every mistake becomes an artistic choice if you pretend hard enough. The sun rises higher, catching the threadbare texture of your coat and making it glow with a sort of shabby dignity. You straighten your posture, letting yourself embody the paradox of the era, broke, ambitious, determined, stylish in ways no fashion magazine could ever predict. And as you continue forward, Paris looks at you not with judgment, but with recognition. You are exactly where you belong. You head toward home, or what passes for home, feeling the familiar weight of your coat tugging at your shoulders. The closer you get to your building, the more the street narrows into that cozy, slightly claustrophobic embrace unique to Montparnasse back alleys. The cobblestones are uneven enough to twist an ankle if you look away for 2 seconds, and the walls tilt inward like they're sharing a secret you aren't invited to hear. This is the part of Paris where rents are cheap, ceilings are low, and dreams come with water damage. Your building looms into view. 4 floors of creative optimism and questionable plumbing. It's the sort of place that would be condemned in any other city, but in Paris it's considered charmingly historic. You push open the wooden door, it groans dramatically, as always, and step into the dim, echoing stairwell. A single light bulb flickers above like it's trying to decide whether it wants to illuminate your morning or surrender to the void. Historians still argue whether these old Parisian buildings were intentionally atmospheric or simply victims of very lazy maintenance. You begin the climb to your room, counting each step the way you always do. Not out of habit, out of strategy. The 3rd stair from the top squeaks loudly enough to wake the dead. The 5th has a loose nail that once snagged your hem, and the 9th is missing a chunk the size of a croissant. Paris teaches you to navigate life like a minefield, but with better bread. By the time you reach the top floor, your breath is just slightly misty from the cold. Your attic room sits under a slanted roof that could, in theory, collapse during a strong sneeze. You unlock the door with a key that looks like it was forged during the Middle Ages. The room greets you with its usual welcome. Cold air, dust motes drifting lazily in the light, and the faint scent of last night's candle. You step inside. Your room is exactly 8 steps long and 5 steps wide, yes, you've counted. The ceiling slopes so sharply that the left side of the room is basically an elaborate booby trap for tall people. But it's yours. Well, for now. As long as you keep promising yourself that you'll pay rent soon. Probably. Eventually. Optimism is free. Fortunately. Your bed sits in one corner, a lumpy mattress that looks like it's been through several emotional breakdowns. Next to it is your tiny desk, held together by hope and mismatched nails. On it sits your cup of charcoal pencils, an oil lamp, and a chipped saucer currently serving as an ashtray. You're not quite sure how old any of these items are. Some came with the room, some were traded, and one you may have accidentally stolen from a cafe after too much wine. A mainstream fact floats into mind. Bohemian artists in the 1920s often lived in repurposed storage rooms, abandoned workshops, or attics like this one, because they were cheap, accessible, and far from the prying eyes of landlords who like to enforce rules. You can confirm with confidence that this one is absolutely not up to code. The draft alone could write a tragic novel. You kneel beside your trunk, your one real possession, and rummage through it. Inside, 2 spare dresses, 1 torn shawl, a pair of stockings you're too afraid to unfold, and your small stash of letters from home. You shuffle past them quickly, not because you don't care, because caring too much at once makes your throat tight, and you have things to do today. You pull out a cleanish blouse and change into it, shivering as the cold air bites your skin. A gust of wind whistles through the cracks in the window. You wedge a folded newspaper into the frame to slow the draft. This is your heating system. Printed news and stubbornness. Your stomach grumbles, reminding you that breakfast happened hours ago and was mostly just liquid caffeine and bravado. You pluck a leftover crust of bread from your shelf and inspect it with suspicion. It's a bit hard, but you dunk it into your remaining coffee from the cafe, softening it just enough to be edible. A quirky tidbit you once heard. Some Parisian bohemians joked that if your bread can double as a weapon, it's perfectly aged. By that standard, your piece is practically medieval artillery. You sink onto your bed and chew slowly, listening to the building breathe. Somewhere below, someone coughs. Above you, pigeons gossip loudly. A neighbor across the hall begins practicing violin, practicing, in the sense that every note sounds like it's filing a complaint. You briefly consider filing one yourself. Then you remember you don't have the emotional energy. After finishing your bread, you tie your hair back with a ribbon you found on the street weeks ago. It's slightly frayed but surprisingly elegant. You smooth your dress, straighten your new dented hat, and look at yourself in the mirror. You look like you belong not in a wealthy, polished Paris, but in this one. The Paris where art grows in cramped corners and beautifully inconvenient spaces. You grab your satchel, checking for essentials, notebook, pencil, crumpled handkerchief, and one coin you absolutely must not lose. You sling the bag over your shoulder, glancing out the window. The rooftops stretch out in uneven lines, chimneys puffing faint clouds into the cold air. The city looks like a sketch someone started and forgot to finish. Before leaving, you blow out the candle on your nightstand. Smoke curls up gently, like the room is sighing tiredly along with you. You pull the door closed and the latch sticks a little, as if your room is reluctant to let you go. Fair enough. It knows you'll be back tonight, exhausted, chilled, and once again pretending that this ramshackle attic is the start of something extraordinary. For now, though, you descend the stairs carefully, avoiding the traitorous steps, and step out into the bright hum of Paris. Your day has only just begun, and already the city feels like a puzzle you're learning how to solve. One creaky stair, one cold window, one long breath at a time. You step back into the crisp daylight, letting the city's soundscape settle around you like a soft, chaotic blanket. Paris mornings have a particular rhythm. Horses clopping, vendors shouting, bicycles ringing, someone yelling dramatically about the price of onions. You make your way down the street toward the market, boots clipping against cobblestones, as you settle into the steady pulse of early errands. Your stomach growls again, reminding you that bread dipped in sadness was not a complete meal. Fortunately, the open-air markets of Paris have a way of luring you in with smells so heavenly they almost feel sinful. Fresh fruit, warm pastries, roasted nuts, each scent reaches out like a flirtatious hand. You follow your nose toward a row of stalls shaded by faded cloth awnings. The first vendor you pass sells flowers. Bouquets burst, in riotous color, violets, peonies, roses the size of teacups. You pause, inhaling deeply. The scent is thick and sweet, pushing against the cool air. The vendor, a tiny woman with arms like tree roots, gives you a knowing look. "Just smelling today?" she asks. You smile, just remembering what beauty looks like. She chuckles, shakes her head, and returns to arranging blossoms. You walk on, resisting the temptation to buy a single rose, even though you know it would make your room feel less like a forgotten broom closet. Next comes a produce stall. Apples shine like they've been hand-polished. Oranges glow warm as lanterns. A man with a grand moustache, even by Paris standards, leans over crates, barking out deals with the authority of someone auctioning artwork. You buy a single apple with your precious coin, carefully selecting the one with the fewest bruises. It fits in your palm like a small promise. Simple food always feels like a triumph. A mainstream fact comes to mind. In the 1,920 seconds, Paris relied heavily on these morning markets for daily life, especially in neighborhoods like Montparnasse where refrigeration was rare. People bought food fresh, carried it home immediately, and hoped it didn't spoil before dinner. You take a bite of your apple, it's crisp, cold, and exactly what your body needed. The juice drips down your fingers, and you lick it quickly before it freezes. As you wipe your hand on your scarf, you will later regret this. A commotion breaks out near the bread stall. A baker and a customer argue loudly something about a loaf being too stale for the price. You edge closer, pretending to browse while listening shamelessly. "No, monsieur, if it bends, it is fresh," the baker insists, bending the loaf with theatrical flourish. "It bent because it is wet," the customer shouts. You turn away before you laugh out loud and offend the wrong man. Parisian arguments are a kind of performance art, loud, dramatic, and always resolved with either handshakes or grumpiness. You continue your walk, munching your apple. Street musicians gather under a lamppost, tuning instruments. One plays a wobbly accordion melody that makes everything feel like a black and white film. Another strums a guitar with only 4 working strings. Somehow the missing string adds charm. A young woman sings with that breathy, smoky voice that feels like it's brushing against your cheek. You drop a small piece of your apple core in the donation hat, hoping symbolism counts. Closer to the main avenue, you see a familiar crowd outside a tobacco shop. Men roll cigarettes, women chat with cigarettes already rolled. Everyone smokes with the kind of existential commitment normally reserved for philosophers. A painter waves at you with his free hand, which is so covered in paint he looks like he dipped it in a rainbow. He calls out, "You coming tonight?" "Where?" you ask. "Same studio as last week." You grimace. Last week, he accidentally set part of the drapery on fire while explaining symbolism. You answer diplomatically, "I'll see how the day goes." Meaning, if nothing explodes, maybe. As you walk, your boots crunch over a thin sheet of frost on the curb. The city sparkles in morning light, chimneys exhaling thin trails of smoke like sleepy sighs. You tuck your scarf tighter around your neck, wishing you'd found gloves in that pile of discarded clothing. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some Parisians swore by rubbing garlic on their boots in winter to prevent slipping. You tried it once. All it prevented was companionship. You push on. The errands you've been postponing tug at your mind. You need charcoal, paper, maybe a new pencil, if your bargaining skills are strong enough. Maybe also a candle that doesn't sputter like it has personal grudges. You stop at a tiny stationery shop tucked between a bakery and a milliner's boutique. Inside, everything smells like ink and dusty ambition. A shopkeeper, a man with round glasses, and the personality of a disgruntled book, eyes you as if calculating whether you're worth speaking to this early. You select a pack of charcoal sticks and a stack of inexpensive paper. He wraps them neatly, hands them over, and says, "That will be 3 francs. You wince. He notices. "You're an artist?" he asks. "In theory," you reply. He nods, recognizing the tone of someone juggling hope and rent. He lowers the price slightly, tapping the counter. 2 francs, and draw something nice with it, eh? You hand over the coins with a grateful smile. Small kindnesses in Paris are like shooting stars. You cling to them when you see them, because you never know when the next will appear. Back outside, you wander slowly, apple finished, hands warmer from carrying supplies. You listen to the soft chatter around you. A woman warning her friend about a new energy powder, floating around cafés. A young man boasting he will be famous by autumn. An older woman lamenting that her cat hates her new boyfriend. Historians still argue whether these street-level conversations shaped the era, or whether they were simply noise beneath the louder shouts of politics and art. But for you, these passing words create the real Paris, the heartbeat beneath the headlines. Your bag now full, you turn toward the quieter side streets, letting the errands drift behind you. The day stretches ahead like an unwritten page, and you feel just steady enough, just full enough to keep walking into it. Odd, messy, beautiful Paris moves with you. You drift toward the studio quarter, the part of Montparnasse where every window seems to glow with creation, or at least with the stubborn refusal to give up. This is where the women of the avant-garde gather, not because anyone formally invited them, but because they refused to wait for permission. The streets here feel different. The air is thicker with turpentine, ink, heated debates, and the kind of ambition that only barely fits inside these cramped buildings. You turn into a narrow lane where laundry hangs overhead like colourful prayer flags. The studios sit shoulder to shoulder, their doors painted in mismatched colours by artists who ran out of money before they could finish the job. You knock on a familiar door, 3 quick taps, the unofficial entry code for people who belong here. It swings open before you can blink. "Finally!" a voice calls. "We were about to start without you." You step inside, and the familiar creative chaos sweeps over you. A tiny room with high walls, cold floors, and a skylight that leaks in the rain, but shines like heaven when the sun cooperates. Canvases lean against every available surface. Brushes sit in jars, cups, shoes, anything that can hold paint. 3 women are already gathered, each with the fierce energy of someone who has spent half her life convincing the world she isn't joking about her art. First there's Léonie, the sculptor. She's shorter than her own marble blocks and twice as stubborn. Her hair is tied up in a knot so severe it could cut glass. She greets you by handing you a rag and pointing at a smudge on your cheek. "If you're going to join the modern revolution," she says, "you can't show up looking like a tired acrobat." You wipe your face, though you're fairly sure the smudge is charcoal from this morning, not fatigue. But in this room, critiques are a form of affection, sharp, immediate, and aimed right at the soul. Next is Mireille, a writer whose cigarette burns on the table resemble constellations. She gestures dramatically with her pen, nearly poking out someone's eye. "I've written 3 lines," she declares. "They are either brilliant or terrible." Historians still argue whether genius starts with confusion or ends in it, and right now I'm embracing both. You glance at her notebook. The lines are, indeed, either brilliant or terrible. It's impossible to tell. Finally, there's Alina the painter, with enough talent to drown the room and enough self-doubt to sink a ship. Her dress is splattered with so many colours it looks like someone dipped her in an abstract expressionist fever dream. She beams when she sees you. "You came," she says, grabbing your hands with paint-streaked fingers. "I've been waiting to show you something." She pulls you toward an easel draped with a cloth. With the dramatic flair of someone revealing a royal scandal, she whisks it away. Beneath it is a portrait unfinished, bold, messy, alive. It's a woman reclining in a chair, looking directly at the viewer with a gaze that feels like she's daring the world to underestimate her again. It's about being seen, Alina explains. Not as inspiration, not as decoration, but as the creator. You feel your chest tighten with pride. This is what it means to belong to the avant-garde. To be seen by people who understand you without needing perfect words. A mainstream fact slips into your thoughts. In the 1,920 seconds, Paris was home to some of the most influential women artists of the century. Writers, painters, photographers, musicians, many of whom only later received credit for reshaping modern art. You move among their lesser-known contemporaries now, women who are equally bold, equally determined, and equally ignored by polite society. Leonie interrupts your thoughts by hauling a block of clay onto the table. It lands with a thud that shakes dust from the rafters. "Time to work," she announces. "If we're going to break the rules, we need to start early." You take out your notebook and charcoal pencils. The familiar weight of the tools grounds you. Around you, the room shifts into its creative rhythm, scratching, smearing, muttering, the occasional swear word, the clang of a dropped chisel, the hiss of frustration. Creativity sounds a lot like chaos when you're inside it. Mireille begins, reading aloud from her notebook. Her story features a woman who leaves her arranged marriage to open a bookstore and accidentally starts a political uprising. Leonie listens for a full minute before declaring, "That woman has better organizational skills than any of us." You nod in agreement. If the avant-garde had a leader, it would be fictional. As you sketch, you listen to the others debate artistic truth. Alina insists color should reflect emotion, not reality. Leonie counters that reality is emotion. Mireille argues that nothing is real anyway, which is her favorite hill to die on. Historians still argue whether the debates of this era truly shaped modern art, or if everyone was just very sleep-deprived and over-caffeinated. Your vote is for sleep deprivation. Halfway through the session, the door creaks open, and a woman you've never seen before enters tall, sharp-eyed, wearing trousers so confidently it feels like a statement. She introduces herself as Sophie and says she heard this studio was where the interesting women hide. You glance at each other. Yes, she fits. She pulls from her pocket a tiny tin. "Caramel?" she offers. You accept one gratefully, biting into the sweet as though it's a delicacy. And in Bohemian Paris, it is. A quirky tidbit you once heard. Some artists kept small tins of candy not for eating but for inspiration, claiming that sugar sharpened the imagination. In your experience, sugar sharpens morale more than imagination, but you'll take that too. As the hours pass, the studio warms with body heat and creative friction. Your sketch begins to form. The curve of Alina's shoulder, the tilt of Mireille's head, the fierce concentration in Leonie's brow. You're capturing not just their images, but their presence, the way they take up space unapologetically. Outside, sunlight shifts across the skylight. Dust dances like gold. Someone starts humming. Someone else curses at a stubborn brush. The atmosphere is electric, the quiet kind of electricity that hums instead of crackles. This is the world where you belong. Women creating not because they're allowed, but because they refuse not to. Eventually, your hand cramps. You flex your fingers, laughing softly, as Alina smears another streak of paint onto her already chaotic dress. Mireille mutters about her characters staging a coup inside the story. Leonie sculpts a jawline with the precision of someone chiseling a future legend. And you? You breathe it all in, letting their energy refill the parts of you the world empties. When you finally rise from your seat, stretching your back, you realize how transformed you feel. Warm, charged, understood. The avant-garde isn't a movement, it's a sanctuary disguised as a studio. You step outside with the others, blinking at the sudden brightness of day. The street greets you with its familiar jumble, and you walk together, unconventional women in thrifted coats, leaving a trail of paint, clay, ink, and possibility behind you. Paris may not fully see you yet, but you are shaping it all the same. You break away from your friends, waving goodbye as they scatter into their various corners of the city, some to studios, some to cafés, some to lovers' apartments, and one probably to accidentally set something on fire in the name of art. You walk alone now. the sun higher, the air cooler, the city more awake. As you drift along the boulevard, the streets widen, the traffic thickens, and the smell changes: less fresh bread, more cigarette smoke, and boiled coffee. Paris hums differently here. Not frantic, not calm. Something in between, like it's waiting for the day's decisions to accumulate before judging them. And around you, whispers begin to sneak into the edges of conversations, the kind of whispers you've been trying not to listen to, even though they've grown louder in recent months. Heroin. The word hangs in the air with a strange weight, both alluring and alarming. Paris's easy escape, as some call it. A white powder drifting quietly through Bohemian, circles like smoke through an open window. You don't go looking for that world today, but it finds you anyway. It starts when you turn down an alley you've walked 100 times before. At first, it's just the usual. Posters peeling from brick walls, laundry lines drooping, a stray cat eyeing you with aristocratic disdain. Then you notice a small crowd, gathered by a doorway: artists, musicians, hangers-on. People you sort of know, but not well enough to ask why they're loitering. Someone waves at you, a man with ink-stained fingertips. You've seen him in cafés, usually arguing about symbolism or sketching portraits of people who never asked for them. "You coming up?" he asks casually, as though inviting you to inspect a new roof tile. You hesitate. "What's going on?" "Nothing much. Just a bit of fun," he says. "A little inspiration, a little calm." He taps the side of his nose in a way that is somehow both conspiratorial and obvious. You've heard this script before. You give a polite smile and decline, stepping back. He shrugs, already turning away. That's the thing about Paris, it doesn't chase you unless you ask it to. You continue walking, but the encounter sticks to your mind like burrs on wool. A mainstream fact you once overheard at a lecture floats up. Heroin was originally marketed in Europe as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. Yes, non-addictive. Historians still argue whether early doctors truly believed that claim or were simply swayed by aggressive advertising from pharmaceutical companies. The Bohemian class, always eager for new sensations and new mind openings, became one of the earliest communities to test those promises. You pass a cafe where two young women in flapper dresses sit slumped in their chairs, one laughing too loudly, the other staring at her hands as if they're telling her secrets. Their table is cluttered, cigarette butts, a coffee cup still half full, a small metal tin partially, hidden under a napkin. You look away quickly. Ahead, a familiar figure leans against a lamppost. Etienne, the violinist who practices in your building at truly unreasonable hours. He's pale today, thinner somehow. His eyes dart around the street like they're looking for something no one else can see. "You all right?" you ask. He startles, then forces a smile. "Fine. Just tired." You've heard him say he's tired every day for weeks, but today it sounds different, hollow, stretched thin across something deeper. He's clutching a rolled cigarette, though it's unlit. His hands tremble slightly. "Come by tonight," you say, gentle. "We're all gathering." He nods vaguely. "Maybe." But you can tell maybe means no, and no means I can't trust myself around people right now. A knot forms in your stomach. The city feels colder suddenly. You continue walking, letting the boulevard carry you toward the Seine. The river glimmers with pale sunlight. And for a moment, it feels like the city is offering you a reset, a clean, watery breath. You lean against the railing, watching the surface ripple. Boats drift lazily. A couple strolls hand in hand, oblivious to everything else. You try to let the calm settle into you, but the morning's shadows are stubborn. A quirky tidbit pops into your head, one you learned from an eccentric poet. Some artists believed the Seine could wash creativity into you, if you stared at it long enough. Others believed it washed sanity out. You suspect both can be true, depending on who you ask. As you watch, a group of young men pass behind you, laughing, talking loudly. One says, "It makes everything feel lighter." Another responds, "Until it doesn't." Heroin's presence isn't everywhere, but it's creeping. And you feel it now the way you feel a draft before a storm. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. You push away from the railing, determined not to let your mood stay heavy. You wander toward a bookstall, one of the green wooden boxes lining the riverbank. A bookseller greets you with a warm nod. "Looking for something particular?" he asks. "Something light," you say. He chuckles. "Light is expensive, but interesting is cheap. He hands you a thin volume of poetry. The cover is worn, the page is yellowed. You flip through it lines, scribbled in charcoal by some previous reader. A little annotation in the margin catches your eye. Art saves. Usually. You buy the book for a few centimes, your lunch budget shrinking again, and tuck it into your bag. As you walk away, you try to shake off the heaviness. You remind yourself that creative circles have always danced dangerously close to extremes, joy and despair, brilliance and recklessness, intoxication and clarity. It's a tightrope the avant-garde walks daily, sometimes gracefully, sometimes not. Historians still argue whether the Bohemian heroin trend was driven by escapism, experimentation, peer influence, or the crushing pressure to create something groundbreaking. You suspect it was a bit of everything, plus the human tendency to seek comfort in dangerous places. For you, though, clarity still feels like rebellion. So you head back toward the heart of Montparnasse, boots tapping steadily, choosing again to stay on the side of art that breathes life, not steals it. Paris may flirt with escapism, but you refuse to let it seduce you today. You return to the studio district just as the afternoon light begins to slant across the rooftops, turning everything gold. An accidental glamour that Paris loves to pretend is intentional. The shadows stretch long and thin along the cobblestones, and the city hums with that slow, steady energy, unique to the hours when artists start waking up properly. You pass a row of workshops, hearing the faint clatter of typewriters, the soft hiss of boiling water, and somewhere, inexplicably, the sound of someone practicing tap dancing. Paris is nothing if not unpredictable. You drift into a familiar courtyard framed by ivy-covered walls. It's quiet here, except for the murmur of voices from the staircase that leads up to a small, drafty art studio you visited more times than you can count. Tonight, the door upstairs stands slightly ajar, warm light spilling out onto the landing like a secret invitation. You take the steps 2 at a time. Inside, the atmosphere hits you instantly. The thick smell of turpentine, the faint whisper of jazz on a gramophone, and the warmth of too many bodies packed into a space that should legally hold 2 cats and half a painter. You slip inside, greeted by laughter and the light scratch of brushes against canvas. It's a nighttime studio, the kind that feels less like a formal gathering and more like a den of shared insomnia. Everyone here is either painting, smoking, or pretending. They're about to start painting once inspiration arrives. A poet lounges on the floor, rereading her own work with the emotional intensity of someone decoding sacred scripture. A pair of sculptors argue about whether a block of marble can vibrate spiritually. You have no idea what that means, but they seem passionate about it. A mainstream fact flashes through your mind. Paris's night studios in the 1920s were legendary not for their productivity. Some produced more spilled wine than finished art, but for the sense of possibility they created. Historians still argue whether these late-night gatherings fueled true innovation, or were simply excuses to avoid going home to cold apartments. Honestly, both explanations feel right. Someone waves you over Alina, cheeks flushed from excitement, or perhaps from standing too close to the space heater. Behind her easel, she has begun a new painting, bold strokes of blue and gold forming the hint of a figure. She steps aside and gestures dramatically. "What do you think?" she asks. You lean in. "It's luminous." She beams. "Good. I want it to look like the moment before inspiration hits." You look at the canvas again. It looks like the moment after it knocks you flat. She laughs so loudly she startles the poet on the floor. Across the room, someone pops the cork off a cheap bottle of wine. It sprays in a thin arc across the wooden floor, eliciting a chorus of cheers. You accept a tin cup from a sculptor who appears to be using his own as a chisel washing vessel seconds later. You decide not to think too hard about it. You find a spot near the window where the air is cooler and the light softer. Someone has put candles on the windowsill, even though the draft threatens to blow them out every few minutes. The flickering glow casts a warm, sleepy haze over the room. You take a sip of the wine, thin, acidic, but oddly comforting. You're not here for the taste anyway. The hours glide by in warm, blurry strokes. Someone plays a quiet melody on a violin, though it's unclear whether it's a rehearsal or simply a way to keep their hands warm. 2 painters exchange tips on how to make oil pigments go further. One suggests adding linseed oil, the other suggests praying really hard. A sculptor offers unsolicited advice about posture. You ignore him politely. In the middle of all this, you pick up a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper. letting your hand move without thinking. The lines come quickly curved, looping, capturing the soft glow of candles on faces, the tilt of Alina's shoulders, the quiet concentration of the poet on the floor. You draw what you feel more than what you see. A quirky tidbit you heard once comes back to you. Some artists believed that sketching at night captured the soul of the darkness. You've always suspected they were just looking for poetic excuses to justify poor lighting, but right now you feel it. The room has a soul of its own, humming beneath every brushstroke and whispered conversation. Halfway through the sketch, Etienne, the violinist, appears in the doorway. His eyes look less frantic tonight, though exhaustion lines his face. You wave him inside carefully, hoping he'll join. He hesitates, glancing at the lively room, then steps in slowly. Alina is the first to greet him. She gently pulls him toward the warmth. "You look cold," she says. "I feel cold," he admits. You offer him your seat by the window. He takes it gratefully, and after a moment, he removes his violin case from his shoulder with reverence. He opens it, takes out the violin, and begins to play not a frantic improvisation, not a strained practice piece, but something soft, steady, full of breath. The studio falls quiet. His music wraps around everyone like a warm shawl, low, mellow, carrying both sadness and sweetness. It feels like he's apologizing for every troubled moment the last few months have carved into, to him. You close your eyes, letting the melody wash through you. Historians still argue whether art flourishes because of hardship or in spite of it. Sitting here, listening to Etienne play, you think the answer is neither. Art flourishes because humans keep trying clumsily, earnestly, obsessively, to make beauty out of their own chaos. When the song ends, no one speaks for several long seconds. It's the kind of silence you rarely get in Paris, the reverent, breathless kind. Etienne sets the violin down gently, his hands steadier than you've seen them in weeks. "Stay with us tonight," you say quietly. He gives a small nod. As the night deepens, the energy in the room softens. The wine bottle is nearly empty. The candles burn lower. People sit on floor cushions or lean against walls, sketching lazily or talking in slow, drifting conversations. The studio feels like a sanctuary, warm, pulsing with possibility, holding everyone in a shared, fragile balance. You sketch a final line, finish your cup, and stretch your legs. Outside, Paris glows with late-night life, but inside this loft, time feels gentler, like a soft heartbeat you can fall asleep to. You stay until the candles gutter out, the gramophone clicks off, and the last drip of paint dries. When you finally step into the cool night air, you feel it in your bones. These nighttime studios may not save anyone, but they keep you alive. Morning eventually has the nerve to arrive again, and you meet it in your usual way, somewhere between hopeful and mildly offended. Your night at the studio still lingers in your bones, a pleasant ache of too much charcoal dust, too much music, and just enough wine. You drag yourself out of bed, straighten your slightly tragic blanket, and pull on the same dress as yesterday with a shrug that says, "Yes, this is a conscious aesthetic choice," even though it absolutely isn't. You descend the creaking stairs, step back into the noise of Montparnasse, and let the city nudge you toward your next destination, a café where the coffee is questionable, but the opinions are endless. Paris has many great talents. One of them is turning basic beverages into political forums. By the time you reach the café, the place is already buzzing like a disturbed beehive. Smoke curls through the air in lazy ribbons. Tables crowd the floor like thoughts in a restless mind. You squeeze through the narrow space between two chairs, murmuring apologies and dodging a very enthusiastic hand gesture that nearly knocks your hat off. You spot an empty chair at a crowded table and slide into it before anyone can claim it first. Around you sit a familiar cast. The student who quotes philosophers he clearly hasn't fully read, the painter who insists color and politics are the same thing, the aspiring journalist who writes articles no one will publish yet, and one quiet woman who listens more than she speaks and always ends up saying the smartest thing in the room. On the table, coffee cups, ashtrays, notebooks, one folded newspaper, and a half-eaten croissant no one is brave enough to claim. Someone orders another round of drinks, mostly because it gives them an excuse to stay longer and argue louder. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind as you listen. In the 1,920 seconds, Paris really was a magnet for political exiles, dreamers, and revolutionaries in training. Communists, Anarchists, socialists, monarchists, everyone had a pamphlet, a slogan, and at least one strongly worded speech. Historians still argue whether cafes like this genuinely shaped political events or simply gave people a place to shout in style. From where you're sitting, it feels like a bit of both. The student slams his palm on the table for emphasis. The old world is dying, he declares. We are living in the birth pangs of something new. You sip your coffee, which tastes faintly of burnt wood and ambition. If the new world tastes like this, you murmur. I'm not entirely convinced. He ignores you. Great revolutionaries rarely pause for punchlines. The aspiring journalist leans forward, brandishing the folded newspaper. Look at this, she says, tapping the headline. More strikes, more crackdowns. They're terrified of us. You glance at the article. Workers protesting. Police responding with batons and bravado. It's a familiar rhythm. You've seen similar headlines for months. The city is restless beneath its beauty, like there's a fault line running under every cafe stool and bus seat. Someone at the next table shouts about democracy. Someone else mutters about the failures of democracy. You watch as ideas collide mid-air like fireflies, rarely landing, always glowing. The quiet woman at your table finally speaks. It's not enough to talk, she says softly, but with steel underneath. Action matters. A hush settles, brief but noticeable. People respect that voice. You can tell she's been places, seen things. Her opinions were not born in the comfort of cafe chairs. You ask her, so what do you do? She shrugs slightly. I organize women who want better pay. I teach them to read contracts. I tell them they're allowed to say no. You nod, feeling a flicker of admiration. Here, in a corner of the cafe, is a revolution that doesn't need manifestos. It just needs someone patient enough to explain paperwork. A quirky tidbit you once overheard makes you smile. One activist claimed that every revolution started in a cafe, and every counter-revolution started when the bill arrived. You glance at the growing pile of saucers and cups on your table, and wonder which direction this one is headed. The conversation shifts, as it always does, from politics to philosophy and back again. The painter insists that art is inherently political. The student counters that politics corrupts pure creativity. You, silently, suspect that both of them are stalling rather than working on their actual projects. Someone brings up heroin again, this time not as whispered scandal, but as a symptom. People are exhausted, the aspiring journalist says. All this talk, all this struggle, and the world still looks the same. Of course, some of them want out. Another person argues that these escapes are individual weakness, not systemic failure. Voices rise, hands wave, coffee sloshes. You lean back, letting the noise wash over you like a messy, ideological lullaby. You're not entirely sure where you stand on any of it. You want freedom, certainly. You want equality, obviously. You want people to stop shouting long enough to actually listen. That last one may be the most unrealistic expectation of all. Historians still argue whether this era's cafe debates genuinely paved the way for later social changes, or if most of it was just performative passion contained within four smoky walls. From your seat, it feels like threads tugging at a larger tapestry, small, frayed, but pulling something loose all the same. At one point, a man stands up and launches into a speech about overturning the social order. He speaks with grand, sweeping gestures and a theatrical voice that suggests he has rehearsed this moment in the mirror. People snap their fingers, clap, roll their eyes, or yawn. You doodle a caricature of him in your notebook, wild hair, flared nostrils, hands raised like he's summoning a very confused ghost. Your sketch gets passed around the table. Laughter breaks the tension. For a brief moment, everyone forgets they're supposed to be very serious people changing the world, and just becomes a group of tired young souls sharing a joke. The quiet woman catches your eye. Sometimes, she says, this is what saves us. Not the speeches, the laughing. You smile, feeling that truth settle comfortably inside you. As the afternoon wears on, the debates mellow into softer discussion. People trade book recommendations, gossip about which writer just secured a publisher, which painter finally sold a piece. You hear rumors of a protest planned for next week, and another cafe being watched by police. A part of you wonders whether you should go. Stand in streets instead of just sitting at tables. Raise your voice instead of just sketching the people who do. You don't have the answer yet. You suspect you'll still be wrestling with that question long after today, long after Montparnasse has changed, and the heroin era is reduced to neat paragraphs in history books. For now, though, you finish your coffee cold by this point and gather your things. The cafe buzzes on, spilling words into the smoky air. You step outside into the cool light, breathing in fresher air like it's a small act of defiance. Paris keeps talking behind you. You keep walking forward, thoughts buzzing just as loudly. You walk until the cafe noise fades behind you, dissolving into the steady heartbeat of Paris. The afternoon light softens, slipping between chimneys and balconies, giving everything a warm, forgiving glow like the city is gently airbrushing its own floors. You rub your hands together for warmth, drift past a line of bookshops, and turn onto a street that always feels like a crossroads between freedom and complication, which, ironically, describes most relationships in your Bohemian life. Love, here, is its own strange creature. It strolls into studios uninvited, lurks in smoky bars, hides behind easels, and shows up inside poems written at 3 a.m. It's dramatic, exhausting, occasionally magical, and frequently inconvenient. And if you've learned anything in Paris, it's that affection doesn't follow rules, it barely follows logic. You slow your pace as you near the apartment of someone who once meant something important and might still mean something annoying. The memory comes uninvited. A painter who used to kiss you like inspiration and criticize your sketches like a professional sport. The relationship burned too bright, too quickly, like someone set a book of matches on fire just to watch it. You don't miss him, not really, but you miss the idea of someone understanding you without translation. A mainstream fact nudges your thoughts. In the 1920 seconds, Paris was one of the first cities where women openly experimented with new forms of independence, sexual freedom, emotional autonomy, choosing partners instead of being assigned to them. Historians still argue whether this liberation was widely practiced or mostly confined to Bohemian circles, but in Montparnasse, it feels as real as the cobblestones under your boots. You pass his building without slowing. Good choice. You keep walking. Romance in your world tends to be episodic. A poet reciting lines in a whisper, a musician sharing a cigarette on the rooftop, a sculptor tracing your jawline, insisting your face has excellent geometry. It did not help the awkwardness that he said this in front of 3 witnesses. But with freedom comes complication. Love doesn't always end cleanly here. Sometimes it fades like old charcoal on cheap paper. Sometimes it shatters. Sometimes it turns into friendship. And occasionally, it transforms into something existentially confusing. As you walk, your thoughts drift to another person, someone whose presence feels like a soft shadow following you around the city. A fellow Bohemian woman named Camille, a photographer who captures the world with quiet precision. She once took a photo of you laughing by accident, and though you never told her, it's the most honest image of yourself you've ever seen. You don't know whether it's friendship, admiration, affection, or something that refuses to be boxed in. Paris is full of undefined edges like that. A carriage rumbles past, wheels clattering loudly. You step aside as a cyclist, whizzes by, muttering apologies. A street vendor calls out the day's prices on roasted chestnuts. The city is a chorus of distractions, but beneath it all, your mind swirls with lingering emotion, desire, wrapped in independence, affection wrapped in uncertainty. You pause before a tiny courtyard cafe, its sign swaying gently. The tables are half filled with couples in various states of emotional disaster. One arguing passionately in low voices, one holding hands shyly, another staring into space like they just realized their date is entirely wrong for them. Love in Paris isn't tidy, it's a public sport. You take a seat at an empty table. The waiter brings a small cup of chocolate, rich, warm, and far above your budget. You savor it anyway. Across the courtyard you spot a couple you know. A poet and a dancer whose relationship is held together by passion and duct tape. They wave you over, you wave back but stay put. You're not quite in the mood to referee their next argument over artistic priorities. A quirky tidbit drifts into memory. Someone once told you that in Paris, relationships are like opera, beautiful, dramatic, and absolutely not designed for everyday life. You laugh into your cup. It feels true today. As you sip, you consider your own desires. You want love, yes, but not at the cost of your freedom. You want companionship, but not the kind that cages you. You want affection that doesn't demand you shrink yourself to fit a man's vision or disappear entirely for the sake of someone else's art. You want something real. Whatever that means in a city that romanticizes illusions for breakfast. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows. People begin leaving the courtyard, drifting toward evening plans. You watch them go, feeling a little wistful, a little hopeful, and more than a little hungry again. You rise, deciding it's time to head back toward Montparnasse. As you walk through the winding streets, you pass loves in progress, loves ending, loves beginning, loves paused for emotional maintenance. All of them swirl around you like fragments of an unfinished novel. Paris doesn't define relationships. It simply reveals them stripped down, messy, vivid, honest. And as you continue down the street, coat fluttering behind you, you realize something comforting. You don't need to have it figured out. You just need to keep walking. And maybe, just maybe, let someone walk with you when the time is right. You arrive on the edge of Montparnasse's gallery district, just as the city slides into that magical pre-evening glow, the moment when everything looks a little too soft, a little too romantic, as if Paris is trying to seduce you into forgiving all its daytime inconveniences. Long windows shimmer with reflected light, and the sidewalks begin to fill with people dressed like they're heading somewhere important, even though half of them are just going to argue about art over watery wine. You slow your pace. Galleries in Paris are tricky places. They promise opportunity, inspiration, humiliation, or mild emotional violence, depending on who's inside and what mood the critics are in. Tonight, you're not visiting as an exhibitor. You've never had enough work, confidence, or money to arrange a showing, but as an observer, a participant in the strange carnival of ego and aesthetics. The street buzzes. People gather in clusters, all talking too loudly and pretending not to notice who's watching them. You overhear someone describe a sculpture as structurally arrogant, which sounds impressive until you realize they have no idea what structurally means. Another person declares a painting too derivative, a phrase critics use when they're bored but want to sound clever. A mainstream fact bubbles up as you weave through the crowd. 1,920 seconds. Paris was a global magnet for art critics. Some brilliant, some eccentric, some self-appointed, and some who couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler, but felt deeply qualified to judge others. Historians still argue whether their harshness pushed artists toward greatness, or simply traumatized several generations into abandoning promising careers. Standing here tonight, you vote firmly for the latter. You stop at a gallery with tall, elegant doors and a sign that looks like it costs more than 3 months of your rent. Inside, light spills across polished wooden floors, illuminating a series of abstract paintings arranged in dramatic clusters. You slip in through the open doorway, pretending you're a patron, and not someone whose shoes squeak slightly when they get too warm. A hostess greets you with a polite nod that suggests she's still determining whether you are artist, critic, or someone who wandered in hoping for free snacks. You give her your most ambiguous smile and move along, before she can decide. The gallery walls are lined with canvases that look like the inner emotions of a very troubled rainbow. Bold colors, jagged shapes, heavy brushstrokes. You pause at one particularly chaotic piece, deep reds slashed across a blue background, circles drifting like wounded moons. A critic beside you leans in and murmurs, "It's clearly a metaphor for the fragmentation of modern consciousness." You tilt your head. "I thought it looked like he threw paint at it during an argument." The critic beams at you. "Exactly." In truth, you have no idea whether the artist is expressing profound emotional truth or simply venting frustration after spilling turpentine on his rug. But the beauty of Paris is that no one expects accuracy, just conviction. A cluster of well-dressed patrons approach a tall sculpture made entirely of welded metal scraps. It looks vaguely like a giraffe having an existential crisis. A wealthy collector strokes his chin thoughtfully. "Magnificent," he says. "Its asymmetry is brilliant," his companion adds. You glance at the label. Untitled. Medium. Found metal, bicycle parts, discarded stove door. You could have made that. You could have made that 3 times and still had enough stove pieces left to cook dinner. But jealousy doesn't sting you, not really. More amusement than envy. The avant-garde is unpredictable. Some artists get discovered overnight for reasons no one can articulate. Others, far more talented, work for decades in obscurity, celebrated only by friends and maybe one well-meaning neighbor. As the crowd shifts, you spot a familiar face in the corner. A young painter named Lucien, known primarily for 3 things: wild hair, brilliant color theory, and an unshakable belief that critics are failed artists who hide behind adjectives. He's currently engaged in a heated discussion with 2 sharply dressed reviewers. You approach cautiously, catching the tail end of his rant. And if you think emotion must be symmetrical, perhaps you should stick to counting apples in a market. Stall! The critics blink. One jots something down, likely unflattering. You pat Lucien on the arm before he can escalate. Breathe, you whisper. He exhales as if you've pulled him from quicksand. You see what I endure? They want to domesticate art. They want art they understand. You correct gently. He scowls. Then they should buy furniture. You stifle a laugh. You wander deeper into the gallery. A soft murmur of approval follows every piece. You enjoy watching the social rituals more than the art, the leaning in, the nodding thoughtfully, the hushed whispers about themes and texture. Everyone here is performing. Some know it, some don't. A quirky tidbit resurfaces. Artists in the 1,920 seconds sometimes planted their own friends in galleries to loudly praise their work near potential buyers. You suddenly notice two men by a landscape painting speaking just a little too enthusiastically. You suspect the tradition lives on. As you move toward the back wall, you find a small portrait tucked in a corner easily overlooked, quietly lovely. A woman sitting on a windowsill, light falling softly across her cheek. Something in the painting feels honest, unforced. There's no attempt to be revolutionary, it simply is. And you like it immediately. You lean closer. The brushstrokes are gentle, deliberate. The colors warm and steady. The artist's name is unfamiliar, just initials. You wonder whether they'll ever be known, whether this painting will ever be recognized. It reminds you of your friends, of their talent, of the work that never makes it to gallery walls because rent, food, and exhaustion get in the way. It reminds you of yourself, 2 sketches hidden in notebooks, ideas waiting for a chance to breathe. Your throat tightens unexpectedly. Maybe art doesn't need to be loud to matter. As you step away, you catch the hostess offering tiny cups of wine to guests. You accept one, not because you like the taste, but because it lets you linger. You listen to the hum of conversation around you. Praise, critique, gossip. It all blends together into one long performance. Eventually, you leave the gallery, stepping back into the cool air. The sky above Montparnasse deepens into blue, lanterns flickering to life. People still cluster outside, debating, laughing, arguing about a piece you didn't even notice. You look back once before turning the corner, part admiration, part relief. In the snob-filled world of Paris galleries, you feel both outside and inside, enough of a stranger to observe, enough of an artist to belong. You continue walking, warmth filling your chest. Art may not pay your rent, but it gives you something better, a piece of yourself to hold on to. You leave the gallery district and head deeper into Montparnasse, the sky now sliding toward evening. Lanterns flicker on, one by one, as though the city is lighting candles for all the artists who forgot to pay their electric bills. The streets grow, busier. Markets close, bars open. And with the shift comes the unspoken truth. Every Bohemian learns sooner or later. Inspiration might be priceless, but survival absolutely is not. Paris doesn't run on dreams alone. It runs on francs. And Bohemians? Well, we run on whatever under-the-table jobs we can get our ink-stained hands on. You cut through a narrow passageway lined with posters, cabarets, political meetings, art shows, some lecture titled "How to Write Like a Real Modernist," which you suspect is a scam. You pass a man handing out flyers offering fast money for modeling. You sidestep him, remembering a friend who signed up once and ended up posing in a freezing warehouse while being told to look more like a Greek tragedy. Your rent is due in a few days. Your landlord mentioned it this morning with the enthusiasm of someone warning you about a thunderstorm he personally scheduled. You have a few coins left, but not enough, which means it's time to find work. Real work. Well, Bohemian work. A mainstream historical fact floats to the surface. Many artists in 1,920 seconds, Paris relied on informal, temporary, and often slightly ridiculous jobs to get by running errands for wealthier painters, posing clothed or unclothed depending on how desperate you were, tutoring languages, selling hand-drawn postcards, or working late shifts in cafés that conveniently forgot to check your paperwork. Historians still argue whether this hustle culture built resilience or simply ensured the entire Bohemian class was exhausted at all times. You suspect the latter. Your first stop is the print shop. The owner, Monsieur Delon, is a man who always looks like he's expecting bad news. He greets you with a sigh. Looking for work? he asks before you can speak. Just a little, you say. Something small. Something legal. He considers you for a moment, eyes squinting behind thick glasses. I need someone to assemble pamphlets. Tonight. Pays 4 francs. 4 francs is not great, but 4 francs is 4 francs. You agree. He leads you to the back room, a tight space filled with ink, stacks of paper, and the ever-present smell of glue. You sit at a wooden table and begin sorting pages, folding, bundling, stacking. It's mechanical, mind-numbing work, but your fingers move quickly. You've done worse jobs. You've washed beer mugs in a cabaret so rowdy it felt like a storm in a teacup. You've held paint cans for an arrogant sculptor who never acknowledged you existed until you quit, and then he said your absence ruined his process. You've even briefly, disastrously, tried busking with a borrowed accordion until a child informed you that you play like a sick goat. Compared to those, pamphlets are luxurious. As you work, Delon mutters to himself. People want everything printed now. Posters, flyers, manifestos, propaganda. Every group thinks words will win the war. What war, you ask? He shrugs. Whichever one they are imagining today. You finish the stack, accept your coins, and thank him sincerely. You step back into the cool evening air feeling a little steadier. Next stop, the cafe around the corner. Not for coffee, your soul can only take so much caffeinated disappointment, but because the owner, Madame Ravel, occasionally needs help sweeping floors or washing glasses. She spots you immediately. Ah, my favorite starving artist, she says, waving a rag like a flag. You want work or wine? Work, you answer. Unfortunately, she laughs. Good. I don't have wine to spare. She hands you a broom. You sweep under tables, gather discarded cigarette papers, wipe down counters still sticky with spilled drinks. The customers barely notice you, artists hunched over notebooks, students pretending to study, tourists trying too hard to look Parisian. You overhear heated conversations about politics, philosophy, the latest scandal. One man claims the world will end within 10 years. Another insists art will save humanity. You suspect both are wrong and right at the same time. When you finish, Madame Ravel pays you in coins and half a leftover croissant, which you accept like it's a sacred offering. That dress of yours, she says, squinting. Is that a tear on the hem? Yes, you say. Good. Means you're working hard. You're not sure whether she meant it literally or spiritually. You leave the cafe and continue down the boulevard, the croissant warm in your pocket. The street lamps glow, their light shimmering on rain-darkened cobblestones. You pass a man selling hand-painted postcards to passing lovers. A woman running a fortune-telling booth catches your sleeve. Let me read your palm, she whispers. Is the reading free? You ask. She laughs. Absolutely not. You smile politely and move on. Your last errand of the night takes you to a tiny apartment above a bakery. Inside lives Madame Chevrier, an elderly widow who hires artists to help with odd tasks in exchange for a few francs and, if you're lucky, a slice of cake. Tonight she needs someone to read letters aloud, her eyesight failing, her need for connection loud as a church bell. You sit on her sofa while she hands you envelopes from her family in the countryside. You read carefully, gently, giving every word weight. She listens, hands folded, eyes bright. When you finish, she gives you a small envelope. For your rent, she says in a whisper. You try to refuse. She frowns. I'm not giving it to you out of pity, she says. I'm giving it to you because Paris needs young people who dream. Otherwise, this city becomes nothing but stone. You accept reluctantly but gratefully. On your walk home, you tally your earnings. It's enough to buy dinner. Enough to keep the landlord from glaring at you tomorrow. Enough to get by another week. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Montparnasse artists once created a mutual survival fund, a box into which everyone put whatever coins they had, and from which the most desperate could borrow. It lasted 3 weeks before someone accidentally spent the entire fund on an exotic fruit they claimed would inspire paintings. You laugh quietly. It feels true. You turn onto your street, boots crunching softly. Paris hums, comforting and exhausting at once. You think of all the odd jobs you've done, all the odd jobs you'll do tomorrow. Bohemian life isn't glamorous. It's persistence braided with creativity. It's survival disguised as art. And as you climb your creaking stairs, clutching your coins, your croissant, and your sense of stubborn pride. You realize something. The city may not make it easy, but somehow you are still here, still trying, still choosing this impossible, beautiful life. By the time the last hint of daylight drains from the Paris sky, you feel the city shifting again, stretching, cracking its knuckles, preparing for its true personality to emerge. If mornings belong to the bakers and afternoons to the artists, nights belong to the musicians, the lovers, the wanderers, and anyone who believes that dawn is merely a suggestion, not a deadline. You wrap your coat tighter as you walk, following the pull of warm, distant jazz drifting across the boulevard like a whispered invitation. Montparnasse comes alive at night in a way that feels less like nightlife and more like the collective exhale of everyone trying to forget their financial problems. Street lamps flicker, shop signs glow, music leaks from nearly every doorway. You turn toward your favorite kind of chaos, a smoky jazz club tucked between a tailor's shop and a bakery that never seems to close. From outside, it looks like nothing, just a narrow doorway and a sign that tilts slightly to the left, because no one has bothered to fix it. But inside? Inside, it's a world. You push through the velvet curtain, threadbare in places, and descend the wooden stairs. The air grows warmer, thicker, tinged with cigarette smoke, cheap cologne, and that faint metallic scent of anticipation. The club is already full. Laughter, clinking glasses, sticky floors, musicians tuning instruments. A trumpet warming up, a bass thumping softly, the clatter of someone dropping something important but pretending they didn't. You feel it all wash over you, like a wave of warmth after a day spent surviving the cold reality of Paris. A mainstream fact threads its way through your thoughts. Parisian jazz clubs in the 1920 seconds were melting pots where cultures collided and transformed each other, American musicians escaping segregation, French performers experimenting with new sound, women carving out space in a male-dominated world. Historians still argue whether jazz saved Paris from cultural stagnation or simply gave restless bohemians an excuse to stay out all night. You decide it's both. You weave through the crowd and find an open spot at the bar. The bartender nods in greeting, a tired smile beneath a spectacular mustache. He pours you something amber-colored without asking. You accept it like a handshake. The music begins. Slow at first, long, lingering notes that feel like they're reaching inside your chest and gently rearranging your organs. The saxophone leads, warm and smoky. The piano follows, playful. The drums roll softly underneath. You close your eyes and let the rhythm settle your frayed edges. Someone taps your shoulder. You turn. It's Camille. Her hair loose tonight. Her coat draped over one arm. A soft smile tugging at one corner of her mouth. "You made it," she says, leaning close so she doesn't have to shout over the music. "Wouldn't miss it," you reply. She slides onto the stool beside you. The bartender pours her a drink too, something red, something bold. She lifts her glass in your direction, and you clink yours lightly against it. The sound rings briefly beneath the music, soft, bright, intimate. You both listen for a while without speaking. That's the thing about Camille. Silence with her feels full, not empty. A trumpet solo takes off, soaring above the crowd. Someone cheers. Someone else snaps their fingers in rhythm. A group near the stage starts dancing awkwardly but joyfully. One man tries to spin his partner and nearly sends her into a table. She laughs and kisses him instead. Paris is like that at night, everyone falling in love with someone or something, even if just for a moment. Camille leans toward you. "I heard you were at the galleries earlier." "I was," you say, rolling your eyes affectionately. "Lots of opinions, very few snacks." She laughs, a warm, low sound. "Did you like anything?" "One painting," you admit. "Quiet, small, honest." "That sounds like you," she says, softly. Your cheeks warm, whether from the drink or her words, you're not sure. A quirky tidbit bubbles up, one that feels appropriate now. Some Montparnasse women claim jazz helped regulate emotions better than therapy. You don't know about that, but you do know your breath feels easier when the saxophone climbs to a high, trembling note. Across the room, Etienne sits alone at a small table. When he looks up and catches your eye, you nod gently. He nods back. He's here. He's trying. Sometimes that's enough. The club grows louder as the night wears on. More musicians join in clarinet, drums, a singer whose voice sounds like velvet dipped in smoke. She takes the stage, gripping the microphone with practiced ease. Her song unfurls slowly, wrapping around the room like a shawl. You sip your drink, savoring its warmth. Camille's arm brushes yours. Neither of you pull away. "Let's dance," she says suddenly. You blink. "I don't dance. You do tonight." She grabs your hand, gently but firmly, and pulls you into the crowd. The floor is small, crowded, messy, but the rhythm makes space for you anyway. You move awkwardly at first, stepping on her foot almost immediately. She laughs, spins you clumsily, then pulls you close so you can sway instead of stumble. It's imperfect. It's wonderful. Warm light flickers across your faces. Smoke curls between you and the ceiling. Jazz swells around you like a tide. And in that moment, your heartbeat syncing with the music, and with Camille's soft steps, you feel alive in a way that makes the rest of the world fade to charcoal outlines. Historians will never write about this moment. It won't make it into textbooks or documentaries. But this swirl of music, sweat, laughter, and discovery is the pulse beneath the history, the softness behind the turbulence, the breath inside the chaos. When the song ends, Camille's hand lingers in yours before she lets go. You return to the bar, cheeks flushed, chest warm. "See?" she says. "You can dance." Barely. Barely is still dancing. You laugh, and it feels like something unlocking. Hours pass. Drinks empty. Songs blend. People come and go. The night thickens around you, soft, smoky, golden. When you finally climb the stairs back to the street, the city's cool air kisses your skin. Your ears ring with fading jazz. Your heart beats steady in your chest. Paris at night has given you something again, something small, fragile, and necessary. Joy. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lets you breathe. You walk home with jazz still humming in your bloodstream, warmth lingering beneath your ribs like the last glow of a candle. The streets of Montparnasse shimmer with dew and cigarette smoke, the buildings leaning in close as if listening. Even at this hour, the city pulses less loudly than in the cafés, less urgently than in the studios, but with a quiet insistence that life is still, unfolding in the shadows. You pass a pair of lovers giggling under a street lamp. A baker kneads dough behind a foggy window. A stray cat stares at you like it knows something you don't. Paris is never truly asleep, just shifting moods like a restless dreamer. But tonight, as you turn onto your narrow street, the mood shifts again. A hush slips into the air. Something heavy. Something that doesn't belong to joy or music. You see two men sitting on the steps of a building across from yours, artists you vaguely recognize. Their conversation is low, troubled. One rubs his face with shaking hands. The other stares blankly at cobblestones. At first, you think they're just exhausted. Paris has a way of wringing people out like damp laundry. But as you pass, you hear a few words soft, frayed. He wouldn't wake up. Your footsteps slow. You don't mean to eavesdrop. But the street is quiet, and the words hang in the night like a warning. 4 hours, the other says, voice cracking. 4 hours before he came back. Said he was fine. He wasn't fine. Your stomach sinks. Heroin again. It's seeping deeper into the edges of your world, not just whispered in cafes anymore, not just passed among reckless thrill seekers. It's in the studios, in the laughter, in the silences, in the trembling hands of people who used to smile more easily. You climb the steps to your building, each one creaking beneath you like a reluctant confession. Halfway up, you hear movement behind another door, low murmurs, something clinking, a muffled cough. You pause. You shouldn't listen, but your heart already knows. Someone inside says, "Just a little, just to take the edge off." Someone else answers with a laugh that wavers at the end. You close your eyes for a moment. You wish you didn't understand, but you do. A mainstream historical fact surfaces, unwelcome but relevant. By the mid-1920s, heroin use in Paris had quietly spread among artists, performers, and working-class youth. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't poetic, it was simply easy. Easier than thinking, easier than feeling, easier than facing the instability that shaped every part of your life. Historians still argue whether this era's addiction crisis was ignored because it was hidden, or because no one wanted to tarnish the myth of Bohemian brilliance. Either way, you're living inside that myth now, and it feels much heavier when you don't get to skip to the romantic parts. You reach your floor just as someone steps out of a room farther down the hall. Etienne. He stops when he sees you. His violin case hangs from one shoulder, his posture curved inward as if protecting something fragile inside himself. The warm light from the jazz club feels a world away. You left early, he says quietly. So did you reply. He shrugs, eyes darting. Couldn't focus. You step closer. Did you play more? No. He presses 2 fingers to his forehead. I couldn't find the notes. The sentence isn't about music. Not really. You want to reach out, but you don't. You don't want him to feel cornered. You don't want to push. Instead, you ask gently, "Have you eaten tonight?" He shakes his head. "Come on," you say softly. "Just a little bread. I have some left." He hesitates before nodding. You unlock your attic room, ushering him inside. The moment he steps in, the draft greets him with a cold swipe, but he doesn't flinch. You hand him the half croissant from earlier and a chipped mug of water. He takes them with trembling hands. He eats slowly, as though each bite anchors him back into his body. "You don't have to talk," you say, lighting your oil lamp. He nods. He doesn't talk, and that's fine. For a while, the only sound is the slow chewing of stale pastry and the faint chatter of pigeons on the roof. You sit across from him on the floor, legs folded, the room dim and quiet. Finally, in a whisper, he says, "It just helps." For a little while, everything stops hurting. You breathe in deeply. You don't judge. You don't scold. You let the weight of his words settle naturally. "I know," you say softly. But everything comes back too. His shoulders tremble not from cold, but from something deeper. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind, one you wish didn't feel so relevant. Some artists swore heroin sharpened their creativity, made their minds expand. Others admitted, years later, that it simply kept them numb enough to survive circumstances they didn't have the strength to fix. You don't say any of that aloud. Instead, you tell him the truth you do know. "You played beautifully tonight. I'm glad you came." That lands. His breath shudders. Silence settles again, gentle this time. A silence that feels like 2 people sharing the weight of something neither wants to name. When he finally stands, he looks steadier. Not whole, but anchored. "Thank you," he whispers. You nod. "Anytime." He leaves quietly, steps fading down the hallway. When you close your door, you lean against it, heart heavy. You look at your tiny attic, the cracked window, the flickering lamp, the lopsided hat still on the chair where you left it. Tonight, the city's magic feels thinner at the edges. Tonight, the jazz glow has dimmed. Paris dazzles. Paris inspires. But Paris also devours. And in the dark of your chilled room, you realize how close beauty and danger sit side by side. Sharing the same cigarette, whispering the same promises. You crawl into bed, pulling the thin blanket over your shoulders, listening to the city breathe around you. The night feels longer than usual. But morning will come. It always does. You wake the next morning with a stiffness in your shoulders, the kind that tells you sleep visited but didn't stay long. Pale light seeps through the cracks of your attic window, illuminating the thin veil of dust floating lazily in the cold air. Paris feels quieter today, muted, heavy, like it's holding its breath. You pull yourself from bed, shivering as your feet touch the chilly floorboards, and dress quickly, your mind still caught somewhere between last night's music and the shadows you walked through afterward. As you descend the stairs, the building groans around you. Old wood, old stone, old secrets. You step outside into the crisp morning air, only to find a small cluster of people gathered at the corner of your street. Some are whispering. Some are staring. A police wagon is parked nearby, 2 uniformed officers leaning against it with the casual posture of men who believe they own the city. Your stomach tightens. Police in Montparnasse are not uncommon, but their presence always shifts the air like a cold draft seeping in under a locked door. You approach slowly, blending into the cluster of onlookers. A woman beside you murmurs, "More raids. They're checking permits again." She shakes her head. As if anyone in these buildings has proper paperwork. You know what she means. Many of your friends live in technical limbo, foreign artists without updated visas, young Bohemians renting rooms under the table, musicians who can't afford to register anything, even their instruments. Paris is a haven for creativity, but bureaucracy? Bureaucracy remains ruthlessly uncreative. A mainstream fact surfaces. In the 1,920 seconds, the French police tightened their grip on working class and immigrant communities in response to rising political unrest and moral panic. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns aim to maintain social order or simply target those least able to defend themselves. Standing here, watching officers move with cold detachment, it feels like the latter. One officer strides toward a group of street artists, sketchpads tucked under their arms, paint-stained sleeves betraying their identity before they speak. He asks for identification. Half comply. One can't. You see the panic in her eyes even from where you stand. She stammers something in broken French. The officer frowns. Your heart kicks. You want to intervene, but your feet stay frozen. Fear is a strange glue. Fortunately, a nearby shopkeeper steps in. She works for me. He lies smoothly, helps with inventory. The officer hesitates, then grunts and steps back. The girl exhales so hard you feel it from 10 feet away. You catch her eye and nod. She nods back, shaken. The second officer circles the street like a wolf marking territory. He pauses in front of the cafe where political debates happen daily. Posters in the window advertise workers' meetings, poetry nights, and one small hand-drawn sign that reads, "Government officials, please stop ruining our coffee." He doesn't laugh. Inside the cafe, people are trying to look casual but failing miserably. Stiff shoulders, tight grips on cups, eyes darting toward the windows. The police presence is like a stone dropped into their intellectual pond, sending ripples through every conversation. You walk past the officers carefully. One glances your way, eyes lingering on your satchel, your coat, your worn boots, assessing, classifying. You feel heat rise along your spine. "Where are you headed?" he asks abruptly. You steady your voice. "To the market." He studies you a moment longer before flicking his hand dismissively. "Move along." You do, each step loosening the knot in your throat. After a few blocks, the tension eases, but the feeling lingers, an invisible weight settling across your shoulders. You pause near a bakery, the smell of warm bread grounding you. Inside, patrons chat softly, trying to salvage a sense of normalcy. You order a small roll cheaper than a pastry and sit near the window. Outside, the city continues its day. A vendor setting up fruit crates, a young couple arguing affectionately, a woman in a smart hat walking with purpose. But underneath the everyday motions runs a current of unease. A reminder that your freedom, your art, your independence is fragile in a world that doesn't always value it. You think of Etienne, the trembling in his hands, the fragility behind his music. The police would see none of that nuance. They would see only suspicion, disorder, inconvenience. Your thoughts drift to Camille, how she moved with confidence even in chaos, how her presence felt like a small rebellion. You wonder what she would say about this morning. Maybe something like, "Systems fear what they can't understand, and they don't understand us." A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Some Montparnasse artists used to carry fake art society membership cards to flash during police checks, hand-drawn, wildly unofficial, and surprisingly effective. You imagine making your own, something with dramatic calligraphy, and possibly a cat with a monocle. You almost smile. After finishing your bread, you step outside again. The police have moved on, but the tension hangs in the air like mist. Conversations are quieter, movements more cautious. You take a long breath and start walking. As you cross a small square, you see two women huddled on a bench, one crying softly, the other rubbing her back in slow circles. You catch only a snippet as you pass. They took him. Your heart clenches. A moment later, you hear a burst of angry shouting from across the square, someone venting frustration at the empty street. Words like unfair, targeted, always us, rising sharp and painful. You keep walking, absorbing the heaviness. In a city celebrated for creativity and liberation, the reality isn't always so simple. Safety is unevenly distributed. Permission is selectively granted. Justice depends on who you are and who's watching. And for a Bohemian woman drifting between studios and cafes with charcoal smudges on her sleeves, life is a negotiation with uncertainty. When you finally reach for your street again, the police wagon is gone. The crowd has dispersed. The air is quieter, but not calmer. You stand for a long moment before climbing the stairs to your attic. Each creak feels louder than usual, each shadow a little sharper. Inside your room, you sit on the floor and draw fast, rough lines, capturing the shapes of officers, the fear in eyes, the tension in hands. You draw not to beautify, but to understand, to slow your racing thoughts, to reclaim a piece of control from a world that feels unsteady. When you finish, you set the sketch aside and exhale slowly. Paris is beautiful. Paris is brutal. And every day here asks the same question. Will you stay soft in a city that tries so hard to harden you? Tonight, at least, your answer is yes. You don't go out right away. You sit on the edge of your lumpy bed, the sketch of policemen and tight faces still drying on your desk, and you feel that heavy, buzzing tiredness that isn't quite fear and isn't quite anger. It's the feeling you get when you remember that, once again, trying to be strong all by yourself is a terrible long-term strategy. You smooth your dress, tuck your hair back, and decide it's one of those days when you don't need more courage, you need other women. Across the street, up one flight of worn stone steps, there's a door with flaking green paint and a crack near the handle. You knock 3 times. It opens almost at once. Finally, says Leonie, not bothering with hello. You look like a philosophy book left out in the rain. Get in here. Her studio is small, warm, cluttered clay torsos everywhere, half-finished faces, one aggressively judgmental cat. A little iron stove sulks in the corner, but still manages to heat the room. Mireille is already there, cigarette in hand, ink smudged across her fingers like permanent gloves. On the table, a pot of thick soup, 3 chipped bowls, and a heel of bread, optimistically labelled, for later. You close the door, and the cold from the street stays on the other side. We heard there were officers on your street, Mireille says, studying your face. You all right? You nod, then shake your head, then shrug the international Bohemian sign for, ask me again after carbohydrates. They understand. They've used it themselves. You sit, take the bowl Leonie presses into your hands, and let the steam fog your thoughts for a moment. As you dip your spoon, a quiet mainstream fact drifts through your mind. In 1,920 seconds, Paris, women built dense, unofficial safety nets, sharing food and coins, passing job leads, warning each other about bad landlords, dangerous men, and streets to avoid on certain nights. Historians still argue whether these webs of help should count as politics or just women's business. Sitting here, with soup warming your fingers, you know it's both. The soup is mostly beans, maybe flavoured with ambition and whatever was cheapest at the market. It's good, you say. It's edible, Leonie corrects. If you want good, we overthrow capitalism and buy a chicken. You laugh, and some of the tightness in your chest loosens. Mireille reaches into her bag, pulls out a small tin, and shakes a few coins into her palm. Hand, she says. You frown. No, hand, she repeats, using the same voice she uses on unruly paragraphs. You obey. Cool metal drops into your palm. You need rent, more than I need 3 bad coffees, she says. You read Madame Chevrier's letters, you fixed my chapter, and you listened to me complain about metaphors for an entire afternoon without jumping out the window. That's a professional service. Leonie tosses in a coin of her own. And you helped me move that marble block. Otherwise my spine would be living in a sanatorium by now. The little stack isn't glorious, but by Bohemian standards it's the distance between panic and I can think again. Your throat tightens. I'll pay you back, you whisper. We know, says Mireille. Say it again and we start charging interest. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some Montparnasse women kept quiet, sock circles, everyone dropping a few centimes into a jar each week. Once a month, the whole pile went to whoever was desperate officially for warm stockings, unofficially for whatever disaster was shouting loudest. This feels like that, just with more clay dust and fewer rules. Around the table, the mood shifts from emergency to planning, the way it always does when the worst of the fear has been named out loud. Someone mentions Etienne's shaking hands. Someone else brings up the girl the police almost dragged away that morning. The air grows warm and sharp at once, filled with a controlled anger that doesn't need shouting to be strong. We can't fix everything, Leonie says, kneading a lump of clay like it personally invented injustice. But we can make sure no one falls alone. That's basically a slogan, Mireille mutters, already reaching for her notebook. Don't move, I'm stealing it. Ideas begin to form simple, practical, stubborn, the best kind. Mireille suggests keeping a quiet list of landlords who are slightly less monstrous to single women tenants. Leonie offers to trade sculpting lessons for cooked meals, so another woman can use those hours for paid work instead of boiling potatoes. You suggest a tiny chalk mark near certain doors and stairwells. Nothing obvious, just a small sign that quietly means, if you're in trouble, you can knock here. Like a secret code, Mireille says, eyes lighting up. But for solidarity instead of scandal. Scandal is included at no extra charge, Leonie adds. For the next hour, the studio turns into a planning committee disguised as three friends chatting over soup. Names and stories surface. Someone mentions a seamstress who always reinforces torn hems for free when she hears the word audition. Someone else knows a bookseller who lets women pay for banned titles in tiny installments. Another brings up a midwife who never turns away a frightened girl, no matter the hour. None of it goes into official ledgers. It lives in conversation, in memory, in the quiet way women say, "Oh, you should talk to her." Historians still argue whether Bohemian women of this era were mainly muses, rebels, or tragic side notes in men's biographies. No one quite knows what to do with the ones who cooked, created, organized, protested, and occasionally threatened to hit landlords with frying pans. Sitting here, watching Leonie stir soup with the same intensity she sculpts marble, you feel how large that unwritten story really is. A knock sounds softly at the door. Leonie opens it to reveal a girl you've seen around the cafés, a painter's model with hollow eyes and a shawl so thin it's basically a suggestion. She hovers on the threshold. "Sorry," she murmurs. "I heard you, sometimes. Help. Only on days ending in..." Mireille says, "Come sit." In one smooth sequence, a chair appears. The "for later" bread becomes "for now," and you pull the spare shawl from your satchel, the one you never wear because it doesn't match anything, and wrap it over her shoulders. "We were discussing an important cultural question," Mireille says solemnly as she ladles soup. "Does it taste better before or after you decide to overthrow the social order?" The girl blinks, then lets out a small, startled laugh that sounds exactly like relief. She eats. Slowly, she talks. About a painter who hasn't paid her in weeks. About a room she can't keep. About nights, when the idea of a little white powder to make everything quiet for a while feels dangerously tempting. No one gasps. No one lectures. You all listen with the steady calm of people who know the edge she's describing, even if they didn't step over it. There's no miracle, no fairy godmother rent envelope, but a spare couch is offered for a few nights. Mireille promises to recommend her to a cafe owner who actually pays on time. You offer to go with her when she confronts the painter, because sometimes courage is nothing more glamorous than not knocking on a difficult door by yourself. It isn't everything, but it isn't nothing. When you finally step back into the stairwell, the sky visible through the dirty window has slipped toward evening, deep blue streaked with chimney smoke. You're carrying fewer coins than when you arrived, yet your footsteps feel steadier, as if someone has quietly stitched a few new threads into the net beneath you. The police still roam the streets. The heroin fog still curls at the edges of parties and studio nights. The rent will still come due. And yet, under your boots, you can almost feel it now, an invisible weave of soup and shawls and shared coins and whispered addresses, held together not by grand speeches but by the kind of stubborn, practical kindness that never makes the posters and never asks for applause. You pull your coat tighter and start down the stairs, warmed more by the women than by the stove. Paris may not always catch you when you fall, but the women will. By late afternoon, the sky has turned a soft, diluted grey, the kind of Parisian light that makes everything look slightly more poetic than it actually is. You've spent the day helping, listening, holding space for other people's storms, and somewhere between the soup and the shawl and the whispered confessions, you realize you've barely had time to think about your own never-ending puzzle, earning enough to keep your lamp burning another night. You step back, into Montparnasse's main artery, where the sidewalks swell with artists hauling canvases, writers chasing deadlines they invented themselves, and tourists searching for the real Paris, while standing right in the middle of it. You weave through the crowd with practiced ease, boots tapping a rhythm that feels determined, if slightly exhausted. Bills aren't paid with good intentions after all. And Your Art has not exactly been an enthusiastic collaborator these days. You head toward Rue Campagne Première, a street lined with small galleries, print shops, and windows that smell faintly of ambition and desperation. This is where artists come to try their luck, where sketches might be traded for a few francs, where poetry chapbooks might sell just enough copies to buy dinner, and where, if the wind is blowing correctly, and the gods of commerce look kindly upon you, you might actually sell one of your drawings. Inside a cramped art supply shop, you pull 3 of your best sketches from your satchel, the portrait of Alina under the skylight, the nighttime studio scene, and the quiet sketch of Camille leaning against a window. You set them on the counter for the shopkeeper, Monsieur Vauclin, to examine. He looks them over with exaggerated slowness, stroking his beard like a man deciding the fate of the universe. You try not to chew on your lip while he judges you in complete silence. His shop smells of ink, old paper, and the unmistakable aroma of artistic disappointment. He finally says. Just Haim. Not good? Not bad? The universal sound of a man who enjoys having power over nervous young artists. He taps the edge of your sketch. This one, he says, pointing at the studio scene. This could sell. Your heart lifts an inch. Could, he repeats, emphasizing it in a way that lowers your heart right back down. He names a price low, but not insulting. Enough to cover a few days of food if you stretch it. Enough to breathe. You nod. I accept. He pays you in coins, carefully counted out. You pocket them with equal care. As you step back outside, you feel a pinch of pride, even if small, even if fragile. You created something. Someone wanted it. Someone paid for it. Of course, this is the exception, not the rule. A mainstream historical fact hovers at the edge of your mind. Most Parisian artists, in the 1,920 seconds, made little to nothing from their work. The market was flooded with talent, brilliant, mediocre, experimental, chaotic, all jostling for space. Historians still argue whether the overwhelming competition was what sharpened the era's genius or simply exhausted its participants. Judging by your tired feet, you lean toward the exhaustion theory. You continue down the street, pockets heavier, mind lighter. Near a café, you spot Lucien the painter, who once declared critics to be art's natural predators. He stands beside an improvised street display. 3 canvases propped against a wall. One, depicting a woman's face, one an abstract swirl of green and gold, and one a new one showing a street at dawn. He waves you over. You like? He asks, gesturing proudly. It's beautiful, you say. And it is. Quiet and soft, not his usual dramatic chaos. You think it will sell? He asks, hopeful. In this economy? You tease gently. Maybe if you pretend it's cursed or prophetic. He groans. I hate how right you are. A customer approaches an older man in a tidy hat and studies Lucien's paintings with interest. You step aside so as not to interfere. Lucien straightens. They begin discussing price. For a moment, you feel a fragile hope for him, for yourself, for all of you. You leave him to it and head toward the Seine. Along the river, bookstalls open their green boxes like treasure chests. You browse lazily, fingers grazing old postcards, cheap etchings, worn paperbacks. The booksellers know most artists have no money, but they indulge you, anyway. Perhaps because someday, one of you might become someone worth claiming to have known. At one stall, the seller, a woman with sharp eyes and a softer smile, looks at the sketchbook under your arm. You draw? She asks. I try, you say. She tilts her head. Trade? You blink. Trade? You give me a sketch. I give you this, she says, holding up a thin volume of poems by a writer you admire but could never afford. It's a fair trade, a generous one, and you say yes before doubt can interfere. You flip open your sketchbook and choose a small drawing of rooftops at dusk, one of your favorites. She takes it with reverence, like it's a secret. She hands you the book and nods. Keep making these, she says. People forget how much we need things that make the world gentler. Her words sit in your chest like a warm stone. You walk again, flipping through the poetry collection. The pages are soft from years of touch. Someone underlined lines in faded ink. You imagine a chain of hands, passing these words forward until they land in yours. Art doesn't pay well, but sometimes it repays in other currencies. Back in Montparnasse, you pass a group of artists arguing outside a bar. They gesture wildly at a large canvas resting on the sidewalk, debating whether it's genius or nonsense. A dog wanders over and sniffs it like it's a philosophical prompt. You hear one artist exclaim, "It's absolutely brilliant." Another responds, "It looks like a spilled soup." Historians still argue whether avant-garde breakthroughs are distinguished by brilliance or audacity. Tonight, based on that painting, you suspect audacity has the upper hand. As the sky dims, you start toward home, coins jingling softly in your pocket. It isn't much. It isn't stable. But it's yours. Money earned through creation, through the stubborn act of refusing to give up. When you climb your attic stairs, you feel something rare and precious. Momentum. Small, fragile momentum, yes, but enough to carry you through the creaking hallway and into your chilly little room with something resembling hope. You hang your coat, sit at your desk, and light your oil lamp. The flame flickers, stretching shadows across your walls. You reach for your charcoal, your paper, your thoughts. For the first time in days, you draw not because you have to, but because you want to. And that here in this precarious, unpredictable Bohemian life feels like wealth. The next morning, Montparnasse wakes with its usual blend of charm and mild chaos. But as you step outside, you feel something different in the air, something slightly performative, slightly artificial. It takes a moment to pinpoint it, but then you notice the cause. Tourists. Not the quiet, curious kind who blend into the neighborhood. No, these are the wide-eyed, overeager art pilgrims who arrive in clusters, clutching guidebooks and expectations larger than the Eiffel Tower. They move, in packs like well-dressed geese, following a guide who speaks loudly enough to wake the gargoyles on Notre Dame. You watch as they point at buildings, alleys, even lampposts, as though each is a relic of artistic magic. One woman gasps at a puddle and declares it symbolic. Her companion nods gravely, as if puddles everywhere have just found their meaning. You try to slip past unnoticed, but the guide catches sight of you, the boots, the coat, the notebook tucked under your arm and beams. Look, everyone, a real Bohemian. The entire group turns toward you. You freeze like a deer caught in philosophical headlights. A camera flashes. Someone murmurs, "So authentic." Another whispers, "I told you they still exist." You are suddenly aware that your scarf is fraying, your sleeves are mismatched, and your hair has declared independence from your comb. You look exactly like the romanticized stereotype plastered on postcards, and unfortunately, this crowd is thrilled. About it, one tourist approaches. "Excuse me," she says breathlessly, "but could you—" "Oh dear, how do I say this? Could you pose for us?" You blink. "Pose?" "Yes. You know, like doing something artistic. Or tragic." You briefly consider screaming into the void just to give them the full experience, but instead you shake your head politely and dodge past them. A few snap photos as you flee. You feel like an escaped exhibit from the Museum of Misunderstood Aesthetics. A mainstream fact drifts into your mind as you put distance between yourself and the flock. During the 1,920 seconds, many visitors flock to Montparnasse seeking the Bohemian lifestyle, often misunderstanding it as glamorous rebellion rather than the haphazard balancing act between hunger, art, and cold attic rooms. Historians still argue whether these outsiders helped popularize the movement or just diluted it into caricature. Based on this morning, you're voting for caricature. You reach a quieter street and stop to catch your breath. A familiar voice calls out. "Let me guess," Camille says from behind you. "You were spotted by the art tourists." You turn. She's carrying her camera like a third arm, wrapped in her long coat, hair swept back in a way that looks effortless but probably took 10 careful minutes. She raises an eyebrow. "Did they ask you to stare mournfully at a wall?" she asks. "Worse," you reply. "They asked for authenticity." She snorts. "That's the most inauthentic thing a person can ask for." You walk together, weaving between early shoppers and delivery boys balancing crates on bicycles. Camille lifts her camera occasionally, capturing ordinary things: an old woman scolding a cat, a baker tossing dough into the air, a child drawing chalk circles on the ground. Where the tourists seek spectacle, Camille finds truth. She stops near a flower stall and lifts her camera again. "Hold still," she says. "No tourists." You groan. "No tourists," she promises. You lean against the post beside you, letting the morning light hit your face. Camille captures the moment, quick, quiet, honest. When she shows you the photograph, something inside you softens. You look like yourself, not the Bohemian mascot, not the trope, just you. As you continue walking, you pass another group of tourists huddled around a street artist painting a caricature of a woman with a nose 3 sizes too large. The woman is delighted. Her friends applaud. You wonder whether they realize the caricature artist mostly paints these because they sell on the spot, not because he woke up every morning yearning to distort noses for a living. A quirky tidbit pops into your memory. Some artists in the 1920 seconds made a full living painting exaggerated Parisian scenes to sell to tourists pictures of cafés they never visited, streets they never lived on, cigarettes they never smoked. Meanwhile, their real art gathered dust in studios. People always want the version of Paris they already believe in. As you walk, you overhear snippets from the tourist groups. Where do the tragic poets drink? Is that where Picasso slept or cried or broke up with someone? Do you think the rooftops whisper inspiration? You exchange a look with Camille. They want Paris to be a story, she says. It is a story, you answer, just not the one they're telling. You reach the small square where painters set up their easels. Today, though, it feels different. A crowd of tourists has overwhelmed the space-blocking light, making demands, insisting on dramatic poses. One man asks an exhausted painter if he can add a little Eiffel Tower in the background just for fun. The painter looks at you helplessly. You silently mouth courage. He mouths send help. Camille tugs your sleeve. Let's get away from this circus, she says. And so you do. You wander down quieter streets, into the kinds of alleys tourists never find, places where laundry hangs low, where children kick pebbles across cracked stones, where old women exchange gossip through second-story windows. These are the real arteries of Montparnasse, the ones that pump steady, unglamorous life into the neighborhood. Camille lifts her camera again. This is Paris, she whispers. You nod. Eventually, you reach a courtyard washed in soft light. Only a few people sit here. A young couple sharing bread, an old man painting quietly, a woman mending her coat. No spectacle, no audience, just life. You sit beside Camille. She watches the light shift on the wall. You know, she says, I sometimes think tourists love the idea of suffering artists because it makes their vacation feel more meaningful. You laugh. If only they knew how boring our suffering actually is. Or how funny, she adds. Or how hungry. She smiles, leaning her head gently against your shoulder. Not romantic, not platonic. Something in between. Something real. The courtyard around you feels safe, grounded. No performances, no expectations. Just the hum of ordinary life, continuing in its quiet, steady rhythm. When you stand to leave, Camille takes your hand for a moment, not holding, just connecting. You're not a spectacle, she says softly. Don't let them make you one. And you walk back toward home with her words tucked in your chest like a charm against being misunderstood. Paris may be filled with fantasies, but you get to choose which ones you answer to. Evening drapes itself gently over Paris, turning rooftops into silhouettes and windows into tiny islands of gold. You find yourself walking without a destination, letting your boots choose the turns. Some nights demand direction, others invite drifting. Tonight, you drift. The sky is a soft violet, streaked with chimney smoke. You pass a boulangerie closing for the night, the baker sweeping crumbs from the counter with ritualistic precision. The smell of warm bread still hangs on the air, cruel, given the current state of your wallet. A cat lounges beneath the window, watching you with the bored arrogance reserved for creatures who have never worried about rent. Your mind feels unsettled in a thoughtful way, not heavy like last night, not frantic like during the police checks, just open. Tired, maybe. Tender. Definitely. You've seen too much kindness, too much fear, too much absurdity, in too short a time. You turn down a quiet lane lit by a single flickering lamp. The chill nips at your ears. You pull your coat tighter and exhale, your breath rising like a tiny ghost into the gathering dark. It's in moments like these that reflection sneaks in, tiptoeing through your thoughts like a gentle thief. How long have you been here? How long have you belonged to this chaotic slice of Paris? It blurs, sometimes the days and nights, the noise and silence, the sharp hurts and soft joys. A mainstream fact surfaces. Paris, in the 1920 seconds, was a magnet for dreamers, precisely because life elsewhere felt too small, too predictable. Historians still argue whether people came to Montparnasse seeking freedom or running from something else entirely. You suspect both are true. You suspect they're true for you. You walk until the buildings dip, revealing a long downward slope that leads toward the river. You follow it. The cobblestones glitter faintly, slick from early evening drizzle. When you reach the Seine, the city feels quieter, less theatrical than earlier, as if Paris has stepped backstage to exhale. You lean on the stone railing, watching the water ripple under the street lamps. Boats bob lazily. The reflections shimmer like a painting too restless to dry. Your thoughts turn to home, not the attic you rent, not even the city itself, but the idea of home. Where is it? Is it a place, a feeling, a person, a collection of moments? You think of the women gathered around soup, of Camille's camera pointed at real life, not postcards, of Etienne finding music again between the shadows, of yourself tired, stubborn, sketching the world one fragile charcoal line at a time. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. A poet once told you that dawn walks reveal a person's true nature, because the soul is too sleepy at that hour to pretend. You smile at the memory. You're not sure whether dawn exposes truth or simply exhausts everyone equally, but you admit it has a certain romantic logic. You decide to walk toward the Luxembourg Gardens. The pathway curves, gently, lined with trees whose branches rustle in the faint breeze. A few early lanterns glow among them like low-hanging stars. The park is nearly empty, just a gardener closing a gate, a couple strolling quietly, and a man feeding breadcrumbs to pigeons who look at him like ungrateful heirs demanding more inheritance. You sit on a bench near the fountain. The water splashes softly, rhythmic, calming. You pull your notebook from your satchel and flip through its sketches of studios, cafés, strangers' faces, rooftops, and once, embarrassingly, a half-finished drawing of a loaf of bread you couldn't afford that day. You turn to a new page. You begin to draw not anything specific, just lines, curves, shapes, the kind of drawing that feels like breathing. The world grows quieter around you, your thoughts slipping into a slow, fluid rhythm. Somewhere behind you, footsteps approach. You don't turn. Whoever it is moves softly, respectfully, as though sensing they're entering a private ritual. After a moment, Camille's voice drifts to your ear, gentle as dusk. I figured I'd find you here. You look up. She sits beside you without being asked, her presence warm in the cool air. She watches your pencil move for a while. You draw when you're thinking, she says. You photograph when you're feeling, you counter. She smiles. It's small, but real. You show her the sketch taking form. The fountain, slightly exaggerated, the trees bending inward, the sky heavy with imagined stars. She studies it with an expression you can't quite read. You draw the world kinder than it is, she says softly. Maybe I draw the world how I need it to be. That counts, she whispers. A silence settles between you, comfortable, almost sleepy. You can hear the water, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant murmur of the city settling into night. Your thoughts drift not heavy now, but searching. What are you doing here? In this life you've stitched together from scraps and hope? Are you chasing art? Belonging? Some version of yourself you haven't met yet? Historians still argue what the Bohemians were truly seeking: freedom, rebellion, meaning, escape. But sitting here, with Camille beside you and Paris humming quietly in the background, the answer feels simpler. You're seeking possibility, not certainty, not perfection, just the tiny, stubborn belief that tomorrow could be better than today, that you're allowed to try again, that beauty can still be found, even in a world full of cracks. Camille leans against your shoulder, head light, breath soft. You know, she murmurs, you're stronger than you think. You laugh quietly. That's debatable. Good, she replies. Historians can argue about it later. You smile, closing your notebook. The sky deepens into blue-black. The first stars appear faint, shy, but present. The streets glow gold in the distance, and you sit there, watching it, all, feeling both small and extraordinarily alive. Eventually, you rise to return home. Camille squeezes your hand before you part. Your boots click softly on the cobblestones as you walk through the dim streets, heart steady, mind clear. And as dawn waits somewhere beyond the horizon, you feel ready for it. Morning arrives slowly, as if reluctant to interrupt whatever fragile peace the night left behind. You wake to the pale silver glow filtering through your attic window, casting soft rectangles of light across the creaking floorboards. For once, the cold doesn't bite immediately. Your blanket is tucked just right. Your thoughts rise gently instead of tumbling into chaos. There's a steadiness in your chest that feels almost foreign. You dress without rushing, pulling on the same clothes as yesterday with the practiced grace of someone who has long stopped pretending her wardrobe is anything other than functional. You smooth your sleeves, tighten your laces, and take one last look at the scattered sketches covering your desk, your little constellation of captured moments. Alina's paint-splattered laughter, Etienne lost in a note, Camille leaning into light, women gathered around soup and solidarity, a quiet courtyard unclaimed by tourists. Even the police raids, the fear, the closeness to danger, they're there too, honest and unvarnished. You slip them into a folder. Not because you need to carry them somewhere, but because it feels like gathering your own history. When you step into the hallway, the building groans its usual greeting. You descend the stairs, boots tapping softly, and step into Montparnasse as it yawns awake. Vendors pull carts across cobblestones. A woman hangs laundry from a high balcony. Street sweepers brush away the remnants of last night's revelry bottle caps. Cigarette ends, torn paper, a single glove whose life story you'll never know. And yet, today feels different. You walk toward the café, where mornings usually begin with weak coffee and overheard philosophy. But today, the place is quieter, almost gentle. A few early risers sit at tables. Madame Ravel wipes the counter with her usual vigor. When she sees you, she lifts a hand. "You look rested," she says. "I think I might be," you answer. She pours you a coffee stronger than usual, perhaps intentionally. You sit, wrapping your hands around the warm cup. The first sip is bitter, grounding. The air smells of roasted beans, warm bread, and ink from freshly opened notebooks. As you sit, your mind drifts not into worry, not into survival calculations, but into something softer. You think of everything you've lived in these streets. The noise, the laughter, the fear, the warmth, the uncertainty, the unwavering companionship woven through it all. You think of the women in the studio, the men in the jazz club, the artists in the courtyards, the lovers leaning into the night. You think of yourself, your growth traced through charcoal, lines, and quiet resilience. A mainstream fact rises gently to your mind. Historians still argue whether Bohemia was a revolution, a refuge, or an illusion draped in poetry, whether it freed its people or consumed them, whether the Heroin era marked a collapse of idealism or simply revealed the fractures beneath it. You sip your coffee and think, it was all of these things, and none of them. Because history rarely captures the small truths, the shared soup, the secret knocks, the care in hard times, the way hope survives in unexpected corners. You finish your cup and step outside. The sky has shifted to blue, thin clouds stretching like silk. The day feels full not of certainty, but of potential. As you walk toward the river, your boots steady, your breath calm, you feel a small shift inside you. Not a dramatic revelation, not a cinematic transformation, just a quiet clarity. This city is messy. It is beautiful. It is dangerous. It is nourishing. It is indifferent. It is alive. And so are you. You cross a bridge, pause at the center, and watch the water move steadily beneath your feet. Ripples shimmer in the light, bending and reforming endlessly. You know the feeling. Life here is not easy. It will never be easy. But you are learning how to stay soft without breaking, how to seek joy without ignoring truth, how to give without emptying yourself, how to let people in without losing who you are. You turn from the water and face the rising sun. Warm light touches your cheeks. For the first time in a long while, you feel ready. Ready for the next sketch. Ready for the next night of jazz. Ready for whatever Montparnasse wants to throw at you tomorrow. Ready to keep walking forward in a life that may not be glamorous, but is undeniably yours. You inhale deeply, exhale slowly, and begin the quiet walk home. Paris hums around you, softer than usual. The world feels gentle for once, and you, tired, stubborn, hopeful, feel gentle too. The rest of the world softens now, the way the city does just before sleep, when even the rooftops seem to sigh. Your footsteps slow, your breath steadies, and the noise of Montparnasse fades into something distant and harmless, just a faint murmur beneath the quiet tones of twilight. Let everything around you lengthen, loosen, and drift. There is no hurry now, no decisions to make, no crowds to navigate, just the warm, steady rhythm of your own breathing guiding you onward. Imagine the Seine again, moving beneath the bridge in gentle, unhurried waves. Let that motion sink into your thoughts, slow, steady, graceful. You do not need to hold on to anything tightly anymore, not tonight. Let the weight slip from your shoulders like a coat hung neatly by the door after a long day. Let your mind wander through soft-lit studios, warm cafés, the glow of distant lanterns. Let it settle wherever it feels safest. Each thought can drift away like a leaf on quiet water, carried effortlessly along. You do not need to follow them. You only need to float. You've walked through crowded streets and quiet courtyards, through fear and laughter and fragile hope. You've held on to others and been held in return. And now, finally, you can rest inside that gentle truth. You are not alone in this world. You never were. Breathe in slowly and exhale even slower. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw loosen. Let your thoughts dim like lamps at closing time. Paris continues its quiet hum somewhere far beyond you. But you are safe here, wrapped in stillness, drifting into a softer version of the night. Let the edges blur. Let the scene fade. Let sleep come gently, the way dawn tiptoes across the rooftops. You've earned this rest.